Picture this. A quiet Tuesday afternoon in October 2023. The autumn leaves are dancing outside a modest two-bedroom apartment on the south side of Detroit. Inside, 62-year-old Denise Washington sits at her worn kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee that's gone cold hours ago. The silence isn't peaceful. It's the kind of silence that echoes with memories. She's staring at 4 empty chairs around that same table. Chairs that once belonged to voices that filled her home with laughter, arguments, tears, and life itself. For 12 years, those chairs never stayed empty for long. For 12 years, her small apartment was the center of a universe she never expected to create. But that was 10 years ago now. 10 years since they'd all grown up and moved on with their lives. 10 years since. A car door slamming outside. Denise's head snaps up. Through her threadbare curtains, she sees something that makes her heart skip. A sleek black SUV with tinted windows, idling right outside her building. In this neighborhood, cars like that usually meant one of two things: trouble or someone who took a very wrong turn. She watches frozen as the driver's door opens. A tall figure steps out, someone in an expensive suit, moving with purpose toward her building. Denise's hands begin to tremble slightly. In all her years of living paycheck to paycheck, of stretching every dollar until it screamed, she'd never seen wealth walk up to her door. 3 deliberate knocks on her door. Not the urgent pounding of bill collectors she'd grown accustomed to. Not the gentle tap of her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. These knocks carried weight, authority, maybe even respect. "Ms. Washington," comes a voice through the door. "My name is Michael. I believe you know my siblings, David, Sarah, and Lisa." The coffee cup slips from Denise's fingers, shattering against the linoleum floor she'd scrubbed 1,000 times over the years. Those names. She hasn't heard those names spoken aloud in her home for a decade, but they've never stopped echoing in her heart. Michael, David, Sarah, Lisa, for children who weren't hers by blood, but became hers in every way that mattered. For broken souls who landed on her doorstep when she had barely enough for herself. For reasons she worked 3 jobs and slept 4 hours a night. For people who called her Mama D and meant it with their whole hearts. For people who disappeared from her life just as suddenly as they'd entered it. And now one of them is standing outside her door, driving a car worth more than she's made in the last 5 years combined, speaking with the confidence of someone who's conquered the world she never got to see. But before I tell you what happened when Denise opened that door, before I reveal the incredible truth about where those 4 children ended up and why they returned after all these years, you need to understand how this story really began. You need to know about the woman who would sacrifice everything for children that nobody else wanted. You need to know about the choice that changed 5 lives forever in ways nobody could have imagined. Because what you're about to hear isn't just a story about kindness. It's about the invisible threads that connect us across time and distance, about debts that can never truly be repaid, and about the moment when 4 successful adults realize that everything they become started with one woman's empty refrigerator and overflowing heart. So settle in, because this story, this true story, will challenge everything you think you know about family, sacrifice, and the power of one person's love to echo through generations. It all started 22 years ago when Denise Washington's world fell apart. 22 years earlier, Denise Washington was a different woman living a different life. She was 40 years old, married to her college sweetheart Jerome for 15 years, and they lived in a modest but comfortable house in Oak Park, a working-class neighborhood where neighbors still brought casseroles when someone was sick and children played freely in the streets until the streetlights came on. Denise worked as a cafeteria supervisor at Lincoln Elementary School, a job that paid just enough to cover their portion of the mortgage, while Jerome worked as a mechanic at Riverside Auto. They weren't wealthy, but they were stable. They had dreams. They had plans. Most importantly, they had hope for the family they were trying to build. You see, Denise and Jerome had been trying to have children for over a decade. Month after month, year after year, they faced disappointment. The fertility treatments they couldn't really afford, the specialist appointments that drained their savings, the pregnancy tests that always showed 1 line instead of 2, the well-meaning questions from family members that felt like daggers to the heart. When are you two going to give us some grandbabies? Jerome's mother would ask every Sunday after church, not knowing that her daughter-in-law cried herself to sleep most nights, wondering what was wrong with her body, what was wrong with her heart, what was wrong with her very soul, that she couldn't do the one thing that seemed to come so naturally to everyone else. By the time Denise turned 38, they'd spent over $30,000, money they didn't have, on treatments that promise hope but deliver heartbreak. The doctors use clinical terms like unexplained infertility and diminished ovarian reserve, but all Denise heard was that her body was broken in ways that medical science couldn't fix. Jerome, bless his heart, never made her feel inadequate. He'd hold her when she sobbed after another negative test, stroke her hair and whisper, "We're enough, baby. You and me, we're enough." But Denise could see it in his eyes sometimes. The same longing she felt, the same ache for tiny fingers and first words and bedtime stories. Then came the conversation that would change everything. It was a Sunday evening in March 2001. They were sitting on their front porch, watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes and play hopscotch, when Jerome said the words that had been building in both their hearts for months. "What if we adopt?" The word hung in the air like a prayer. Adoption. They whispered about it before, late at night when they thought they were the only ones awake in the world. But saying out loud in daylight made it real. "You know we can't afford those private adoption agencies," Denise replied, her voice barely above a whisper. $25,000, $30,000 just to get on a waiting list? And we're too old for most of them anyway. Jerome took her hand, his callous mechanic's fingers intertwining with hers. "What about foster care? What about the kids that nobody else wants?" And there it was, the seed of everything that would follow. The kids that nobody else wanted. Within 2 months, they'd signed up for foster parent training classes. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening for 10 weeks, they sat in a circle of folding chairs in the basement of Holy Trinity Baptist Church, learning about trauma and attachment and the dozens of ways children could be failed by the adults meant to protect them. Denise learned about kids who've been abused, neglected, abandoned, children who flinch when adults raise their voices, children who hoarded food because they'd learned that meals weren't guaranteed, children who couldn't sleep without checking the locks on doors and windows because safety had always been temporary. The more she learned, the more her heart expanded. These weren't just statistics or case studies. These were babies, toddlers, teenagers who needed exactly what she'd been aching to give for 15 years. Unconditional love, stability, a home where they could heal. "We could make a difference," she told Jerome one night after a particularly heavy training session about children aging out of the system. "We could be the family someone needs." Jerome smiled, that slow, warm smile that had made her fall in love with him in college. "Baby, you've got enough love in you to heal the whole world. Let's start with whoever needs us most." The call came on a Thursday evening in September, just as Denise was pulling a meatloaf from the oven. Their social worker, Mrs. Patterson, sounded tired but hopeful. "Denise, honey, I've got a situation. 2 siblings, ages 8 and 10. Their grandmother passed last month, and they've been bouncing between relatives who can't really take them. Good kids, but they're scared and they've been through a lot. The boy has some behavioral issues, acting out at school, not sleeping. The girl barely talks. They need stability, and they need it tonight. Can you take them?" Denise didn't hesitate. "Bring them home." Home, that's what she called it. Even though Marcus and Keisha arrived with nothing but a garbage bag full of clothes that didn't fit and eyes that had seen too much. Marcus, 10 years old, with his grandmother's cheekbones and a protective stance that made him look older than his years. Keisha, 8, who were behind her big brother and communicated mostly through whispers that only he could hear. For 6 months, Denise and Jerome poured everything they had into these children. They attended school meetings and therapy appointments. They learned Marcus's triggers, loud noises, raised voices, anyone walking up behind him without warning. They discovered that Keisha could draw like an angel, but only when she felt completely safe, which took weeks to achieve. Slowly, gradually, the house began to fill with the sounds Denise had dreamed of her entire adult life. Marcus's laughter when Jerome taught him to change a tire. Keisha's voice, soft and sweet, asking for help with homework. Movie nights on the couch with a bowl of popcorn and 2 children who were learning, day by day, that love didn't have to be temporary. Then Jerome had his heart attack. March 15th, 2002. Denise was at work, ladling mashed potatoes onto lunch trays and thinking about Marcus's upcoming birthday party, when her phone rang. Jerome had collapsed at the shop. By the time she got to hospital, he was gone, 43 years old. No warning, no goodbye, no chance to tell him that Marcus had finally started calling them Mom and Dad instead of their first names. No chance to show him the drawing Keisha had made of their family. 4 stick figures holding hands in front of a house with a heart-shaped sun in the sky. The funeral was a blur of tears and casseroles, and people telling her everything happened for a reason. But sitting in that church pew with Marcus on one side and Keisha on the other, both children clinging to her hands like lifelines, Denise realized that her reasons had just gotten a lot more complicated. You see, Jerome's death didn't just take away her husband. It took away half their income, their health insurance, and their foster care eligibility. The state requires 2-parent households for long-term placements or single parents with substantial financial resources. Denise had neither. Mrs. Patterson delivered the news gently but firmly. Marcus and Keisha would need to be placed elsewhere. The system had protocols, rules, procedures. But as Denise looked at these 2 children who had already lost too much, their parents, their grandmother, their sense of security, she made a decision that would define the rest of her life. "No," she said quietly. "They're not going anywhere." Mrs. Patterson frowned. "Denise, honey, I understand you're grieving, but you can't keep them without proper approval. Your financial situation has changed. The requirements, Denise interrupted, her voice stronger now, don't understand what these babies have been through. They don't understand that Marcus hasn't had a nightmare in 3 weeks, or that Keisha drew me a picture yesterday and signed it, 'Love, your daughter.' They don't understand that taking them away from the only stability they've found will break them all over again." That night, after Mrs. Patterson left with promises to work something out that they both knew were empty, Denise sat down with Marcus and Keisha at that same kitchen table where she'd later sit alone 10 years in the future. "Listen to me," she said, taking their small hands in hers. "I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know how we're going to make it work. But I need you to know something. You are my children now. Not because the state says so, not because some paper makes it official, but because love makes it true. And I will fight for you until my last breath." Marcus, try and be brave, asked the question that was breaking his heart. "Are we going to have to leave again?" Denise looked into his eyes that had seen his parents die in a car accident when he was 6, eyes that had watched his grandmother waste away from cancer, eyes that had learned to expect abandonment, and made a promise that would cost her everything and give her everything all at once. "Not if I can help it, baby. Not if I can help it." But promises, as any single mother in America can tell you, don't pay rent. They don't buy groceries or school supplies or the insulin that Keisha would need when she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes 6 months later. They don't replace the income of a husband whose life insurance policy had lapsed because money was too tight to keep up with the premiums. What Denise didn't know that night, as she tucked 2 frightened children into bed and wondered how she'd afford breakfast in the morning, was that her real story was just beginning. She didn't know that her little family of 3 was about to become a family of 5 in the most unexpected way possible. She didn't know that the next 2 years would test every ounce of strength she possessed and then demand more. She didn't know that the love she was promising would require sacrifices she couldn't yet imagine. And she certainly didn't know that 20 years later, a black SUV would pull up to her door, carrying the answer to questions she'd stopped asking, and the vindication of every sleepless night, every empty stomach, every choice to put their needs before her own. Because sometimes the most important chapters of our lives begin with the simplest words. Not if I can help it. Sometimes love really is enough to change the world, one child at a time. But first, Denise had to learn just how much enough was going to cost her. 2 years. That's how long Denise managed to keep Marcus and Keisha under the radar of the system that wanted to separate them. 2 years of working double shifts at the school cafeteria, taking on weekend catering gigs, and cleaning offices at night after the children were asleep. 2 years of stretching every dollar like it was made of elastic, of feeding growing children, while her own meals became smaller and less frequent. Marcus was 12 now, tall and lanky, wearing Jerome's old jackets that still smelled faintly of motor oil and love. Keisha was 10, still quiet but blooming like a flower that had finally found the right soil. They called her Mama D now without any hesitation, and Denise had learned to manage Keisha's diabetes with the precision of a nurse and the desperation of a mother who couldn't afford to make mistakes. Life wasn't easy, but it was theirs. They had routines. Marcus helped with laundry and took pride in being the man of the house. Keisha drew pictures of their family and stuck them to the refrigerator with magnets shaped like apples. They did homework at the kitchen table, while Denise prepared dinner, usually something creative born from whatever was on sale that week. It was a Tuesday evening in November 2004 when their small, carefully balanced world got turned upside down. Denise was helping Marcus with algebra, a subject that reminded her painfully of Jerome, who'd been the math expert in their household, when her cell phone rang. Unknown number. In her experience, unknown numbers meant bill collectors or telemarketing, so she almost didn't answer. Ms. Washington? This is Detective Angela Rodriguez with Child Protective Services. I'm sorry to call so late, but we have an emergency situation, and, well, your name came up. Denise's blood went cold. Had someone reported her for keeping Marcus and Keisha without official custody? Had the system finally caught up with their little family? What kind of situation? Denise asked, stepping into the hallway where the children couldn't hear. There's been a house fire on the east side. Parents didn't make it out. We've got 4 children, siblings, with nowhere to go. The oldest is 14, youngest is 6. Emergency placements are full, and look, I'm going to be straight with you. These aren't easy kids. They've been through the system before. Multiple placements. The teenage boy has anger issues. The middle girl has some developmental delays, and the little ones, they've seen things no child should see. Detective Rodriguez paused, and Denise could hear papers shuffling, phones ringing in the background. The chaos of a system overwhelmed. Mrs. Patterson retired last year, but she left notes about you. Said you worked miracles with Marcus and Keisha Thompson. Said you were someone who understood that love doesn't always come with a manual. Denise closed her eyes. For children, she could barely afford 2. Her apartment had only 2 bedrooms. She was already working 16-hour days just to keep food on the table and insulin in the refrigerator. What are their names? She heard herself ask. Michael, David, Sarah, and Lisa Carter. They're good kids, Ms. Washington, but they're scared and they're angry, and they need someone who won't give up on them when things get hard. Because things will get hard. Through the doorway, Denise could see Marcus helping Keisha with her spelling homework. Both of them bent over her notebook with the kind of concentration that spoke of children who understood that education was a privilege, not a right. They'd been those scared, angry children once. Someone, she, had refused to give up on them. How long would it be? Denise asked, though she already knew the answer. Honestly, could be months, could be years. They're hard to place together, and the state prefers to keep siblings together when possible. But I won't lie to you, most families aren't equipped for 4 kids at once, especially when they come with this much baggage. Denise thought about her bank account, which currently held $127, and wouldn't see another deposit until Friday. She thought about her refrigerator, stocked with just enough food to last until her next grocery run. She thought about her 2-bedroom apartment with Marcus and Keisha already sharing 1 room. She thought about 4 children sitting in some sterile office, clutching whatever belongings had survived the fire, wondering if anyone in the world would want them. Bring them here, she said. Ms. Washington, are you sure? I haven't even told you about their behavioral issues or special needs. Michael, the oldest, he's been in 6 different homes in the past 2 years. He runs away. He fights. David has night terrors, so severe he's been hospitalized twice. Sarah needs speech therapy and special education services. And Lisa hasn't spoken since the fire. Detective Rodriguez, Denise said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Do you have children? Yes, ma'am. 2 boys. And if something happened to you and your husband tonight, Would you want someone to weigh their bank account before deciding whether your boys deserve love? A long silence on the other end of the line. Then, we'll be there in an hour. The next hour was a whirlwind of preparation that would have been comedy if it weren't so heartbreaking. Denise sent Marcus to the corner store with their last $20 to buy bread, peanut butter, and generic cereal. She and Keisha pulled every spare blanket and pillow they owned into the living room, creating a makeshift sleeping area that looked more like a campout than a bedroom. "Mama D," Marcus said when he returned with the groceries, "are we really getting for more kids?" "We're helping for more kids," Denise corrected gently, "for as long as they need us to." Keisha looked up from a nest of blankets she was arranging. "Will they like us?" The question broke Denise's heart a little. Even now, after 2 years of security, her daughter still worried about being likable, about being worthy of staying. "Baby girl, you and Marcus are to teach them what I taught you, that this is a house where love lives." They might not be ready to believe it at first, but that's okay. We'll show them one day at a time. When the knock came, Denise opened her door to find Detective Rodriguez, standing with 4 children who looked like they'd been through war. Because, in many ways, they had. Michael Carter stood in front, 14 years old, but carried himself like someone much older. His clothes were too big, donations from a church clothing drive, and his eyes darted constantly, cataloging exits, threats, opportunities. His dark skin bore a few healing cuts from the fire, and his hair needed cutting. But it was his posture that told a real story. Shoulders back, chin up, ready to fight the world if necessary to protect the 3 smaller figures behind him. David was 12, almost Marcus's age. But where Marcus had learned to trust, David radiated suspicion. He clutched a singed stuffed elephant, the only toy that had survived the fire, and his free hand gripped his little sister's shoulder with the desperation of someone who'd learned that people you love can disappear in smoke and flame. Sarah was 9, with eyes that seemed older than her years and a developmental delay that made her seem younger than her body. She rocked slightly on her feet, a self-soothing behavior that spoke of too many nights trying to comfort herself when no adult could. Her clothes were mismatched and her shoes had holes, but she maintained a grip on 6-year-old Lisa's hand, like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to earth. And Lisa, sweet Lisa, the baby of the group, stood silent and wide-eyed, her thumb in her mouth despite being too old for the comfort it provided. She hadn't spoken since the night she watched flames consume everything she'd ever known, including the parents who'd love her despite their own demons. For children, for separate histories of loss, for sets of eyes that had learned not to hope too hard because disappointment was the only guarantee in their experience. "Come in," Denise said softly, stepping aside. "You're safe here." What happened next was the kind of scene that would replay in Denise's memory for the rest of her life. Michael, the protector, stepped inside first, scanning the small apartment like a general surveying potential battlefields. His eyes took in everything: the clean but worn furniture, the family photos on the side table, the smell of meatloaf still lingering in the air, Marcus and Keisha standing uncertainly in the doorway between the kitchen and living room. "This is Marcus and Keisha," Denise said gently. "They've been part of our family for 2 years. Marcus, Keisha, come meet your new brothers and sisters." The word family hit the air like a small explosion. Michael's carefully constructed armor cracked just slightly. David's grip on his elephant tightened. Sarah stopped rocking. And Lisa looked up at Denise with eyes that held a question she didn't have words for. Marcus, bless his heart, stepped forward first. "Hey," he said to Michael, "you hungry? Mama D makes the best meatloaf in Detroit. And there's cake for dessert. It's from a box, but she puts extra vanilla in it." It was such a simple offer, but it carried the weight of everything Marcus had learned about survival and love in this house. Food meant safety. Sharing meant family. Vanilla and box cake meant someone who cared enough to make ordinary things special. For a moment, nobody moved. Then David's stomach growled loudly enough for everyone to hear, and despite everything, the trauma, the fear, the uncertainty, Lisa giggled. Just a small sound, barely audible, but it was the first sound she'd made in weeks. And in that giggle, Denise heard something that would sustain her through every impossible day to come. The sound of healing beginning. "All right then," she said, clapping her hands together. "Let's eat." That first dinner was awkward and beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. 6 people squeezed around a table meant for 4, eating meatloaf that had to be stretched with extra breadcrumbs and hope. Michael sat rigid, eating mechanically, ready to run. David kept one arm around his elephant while he ate one-handed. Sarah hummed softly to herself, a coping mechanism that would become the soundtrack to their early days. Lisa ate tiny bites, testing whether this food, this kindness, this moment of peace was real or just another temporary stop before the next loss. And Denise watched it all, her heart expanding and breaking simultaneously, knowing that she just committed to an impossible thing. Raising 6 children on an income meant for 2 adults, in a space meant for a small family, with love that would have to multiply like loaves and fishes to cover all the wounds that needed healing. After dinner, as she helped settle 4 traumatized children into sleeping arrangements that would have challenged a camp counselor, Detective Rodriguez pulled her aside. "Are you sure about this, Denise? Really sure? Because once you're in, these kids need you to stay in. They can't handle another abandonment." Denise looked around her tiny living room, now transformed into a refugee camp of hope. Marcus was showing Michael how the couch pulled out into a bed. Keisha was offering Sarah one of her stuffed animals. David sat cross-legged on the floor, finally letting his elephant rest on his lap, instead of clutching it defensively. And Lisa had curled up in a corner with a book, not reading but holding it like a talisman. "Detective Rodriguez," Denise said quietly, "I've been poor before. I've been alone before. I've been scared before. But I've never been a mother to 6 children who needed me, and I've never been more sure of anything in my life." And so began the most challenging, most rewarding, most impossible 12 years of Denise Washington's life. What she didn't know yet was that those 4 children hadn't just lost their parents in that fire. They'd lost everything. No relatives willing to take them. No inheritance except trauma. No resources except their fierce loyalty to each other, and a 14-year-old boy who'd appoint himself their guardian at an age when most kids worried about algebra tests. What she didn't know was that Michael had been keeping secrets about money he'd stolen to feed his siblings, about the nights he'd stayed awake to keep watch, about the promises he'd made to his dying mother that he'd keep them all together no matter what. What she didn't know was that in choosing to love them, she was setting in motion a chain of events that would echo through decades, changing not just their lives, but the lives of everyone they'd eventually touch. All she knew was that 4 more children needed her, and "not if I can help it" had just become a promise to fight the whole world if necessary. The real story was just beginning. The first winter was the hardest. 6 people in a 2-bedroom apartment meant that privacy was a luxury none of them could afford. Michael slept on the pull-out couch, hyper-vigilant and protective, waking at every sound. David and Marcus shared the boys' room, though David's night terrors meant that sleep was a rare commodity for anyone. Sarah and Keisha bunked together, with Sarah's humming providing an oddly comforting soundtrack to their dreams. And Lisa made herself a nest in Denise's room, too afraid of the dark and too afraid of being alone to sleep anywhere else. The heating bill that December was $340. Denise's monthly income was $1,200. After rent, utilities, and Keisha's insulin, they had about $200 left for everything else: food, clothing, school supplies, and 1,000 small emergencies that come with raising children. Denise learned to cook with a creativity born of desperation. Rice and beans became a foundation, stretched with whatever vegetables were marked down for quick sale. Pasta with butter and Parmesan became a feast when there was a little extra money. She learned to shop at 3 different grocery stores to catch all the sales, to clip coupons like her life depended on it, because it did. But the money wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was watching 4 traumatized children try to learn how to be a family when they'd never had a reason to trust that families could be permanent. Michael ran away 3 times that first winter. Never far, just to the abandoned lot behind the convenience store, where he could see the apartment building and make sure his siblings were safe. Each time, Denise would find him there, sitting on a broken playground swing in the dark, and each time she'd sit down next to him without saying a word until he was ready to come home. "You don't understand," he told her after the third time, his 14-year-old voice cracking with emotions too big for his body. Everyone leaves. Everyone dies. Everyone gives up. I can't let them get attached to you just to lose you too. Denise looked at this boy who'd been forced to become a man before he'd learned to be a child, who carried the weight of 3 younger siblings on shoulders that should have been carrying a backpack and teenage dreams. Michael, she said softly, I can't promise you that nothing bad will ever happen again. Life doesn't work that way. But I can promise you this. As long as I have breath in my body, you 4 have a home. Not because it's easy, not because I have all the resources you need, but because love isn't about having enough. It's about giving everything you have. Slowly, gradually, they began to find their rhythm. Marcus taught Michael to play chess, and Michael taught Marcus about engines and how things worked. David and Marcus became unlikely allies, bonding over their shared experience of being the responsible ones. Sarah attached herself to Keisha, following her around like a devoted shadow, learning that girls could be strong and smart and worthy of love. And Lisa began to whisper to Denise at bedtime. Single words at first. Water. Hungry. Scared. Then short phrases. Bad dream. Love you, Mama D. Don't leave. The knock on the door came on a Monday morning in January 2006. Denise was getting 6 children ready for school, a logistical nightmare that required military precision and the patience of a saint, when Child Protective Services arrived with paperwork and questions. The investigation was thorough and terrifying. Home visits, interviews with the children, financial audits that laid bare just how impossible their situation really was. The social worker, a young man named Tom Bradley, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, walked through their cramped apartment making notes about inadequate space and insufficient resources. Ms. Washington, he said, sitting at their kitchen table while the children were at school, I can see that you love these children, but love isn't enough. You're housing 6 minors in a space approved for 2 adults. Your income is below poverty level for a family this size. You don't have legal custody of any of them except through emergency placement orders that expired months ago. Denise sat across from him, hands folded, wearing the expression she perfected over 30 years of dealing with bureaucracy that saw numbers instead of human beings. Mr. Bradley, she said calmly, let me ask you something. In all your visits to foster homes and group facilities, have you ever seen 6 children who feel safer, who are doing better in school, who are healing from trauma more effectively than these 6? He consulted his notes, clearly uncomfortable. Their academic performance has improved significantly. Their medical care is consistent. The psychological evaluations show marked improvement in all areas. But that's not what you're here to measure, is it? Denise interrupted gently. You're here to measure square footage and income brackets and whether the right papers are filed in the right order. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of 6 children coming home, laughing, arguing about homework, calling out, Mama D, we're home, in voices that had learned to expect an answer. Tom Bradley watched as they flowed into the apartment, like water finding its level. Michael immediately started helping Lisa with her backpack. David and Marcus began their daily debate about which TV show to watch. Sarah hummed while she sorted through the mail, a job Denise had given her because it made her feel important and needed. Keisha headed straight for the kitchen to check her blood sugar, a routine so ingrained that she barely thought about it. It was chaos, but it was organized chaos. It was loud, but it was the sound of life being lived fully. It was crowded, but it was full of love. Mr. Bradley, 14-year-old Michael said, noticing the stranger at their table, are you here to take us away? The directness of the question hung in the air like smoke. David moved protectively closer to Sarah and Lisa. Marcus stepped up beside Michael, presenting a united front. Keisha's hand found Denise's shoulder, seeking reassurance. I'm here to make sure you're all being taken care of properly, Tom said carefully. We are, Michael replied without hesitation. Mama D takes better care of us than anyone ever has. She works 3 jobs so we can stay together. She stays up all night when we're sick. She's teaching David that men can cry without being weak, and she's teaching Sarah that being different doesn't mean being less. She's the first adult who ever kept a promise to us. Tom Bradley looked around the cramped apartment again, but this time he seemed to be seeing something different. The math worksheet spread across the coffee table, carefully supervised homework in progress. The medication chart on the refrigerator, tracking Keisha's insulin with medical precision. The chore wheel that gave every child age-appropriate responsibilities and a sense of contribution. The family photos, recent ones, showing 6 smiling faces that had learned to believe in permanence. What Tom Bradley saw that day must have influenced his report, because the official custody challenges mysteriously faded away. Denise never knew if strings were pulled, or if the system simply decided that sometimes common sense trumped bureaucracy. All she knew was that her 6 children got to stay her 6 children, and they were her children now, in every way that mattered. Michael's anger had transformed into fierce protectiveness, not just for his biological siblings, but for Marcus and Keisha too. He started working part-time at a local garage at 16, insisting on contributing to household expenses despite Denise's protests. "You took care of us when we had nothing to give back," he told her. "Now I can help take care of the family." David had grown into a quiet, thoughtful teenager who channeled his trauma into poetry and music. He wrote songs about loss and hope, performing them at school talent shows with a voice that could make grown adults cry. His night terrors had mostly stopped, replaced by dreams of stages and applause and futures that seemed suddenly possible. Sarah bloomed in ways that defied every expert prediction about her limitations. With patient tutoring from Denise and extra help at school, she discovered a gift for working with animals. She volunteered at the local animal shelter, where her gentle nature and intuitive understanding of wounded creatures made her indispensable. And Lisa found her voice again. Not all at once. It came back slowly, word by word, sentence by sentence, story by story. She became the family's storyteller, weaving elaborate tales at dinner that mixed truth and imagination until everyone was laughing. Her voice was soft but strong, carrying wisdom that seemed impossible for someone so young. Marcus and Keisha adapted to their expanded family with the resilience that had already carried them through so much. Marcus became the bridge between the two groups, translating between different trauma languages and different coping mechanisms. Keisha pointed herself the family's emotional barometer, somehow always knowing who needed extra attention and when. The apartment that had seemed impossibly small began to feel like it was expanding through sheer force of love. They created privacy with hanging blankets and unspoken rules about personal space. They developed a bathroom schedule that would have impressed military logistics coordinators. They learned to share everything: clothes, books, dreams, fears, hope. Denise's days began at 4 a.m. and ended well past midnight. Up before dawn, prepare breakfast and lunch for 6 growing children, then off to her morning shift at the school cafeteria. Home for an hour in the afternoon to check homework and start dinner, then off to her evening cleaning job. Weekends meant grocery shopping with military precision, laundry that never seemed to end, and the Sunday family meetings where everyone got to share their week and voice any concerns. But something beautiful was happening in the midst of all that exhaustion. These 6 children, brought together by tragedy and held together by one woman's refusal to accept that love had limits, were becoming something the system said was impossible: a real family. If the early years were about survival, the middle years were about identity. 6 teenagers under one roof meant 6 different personalities, 6 different dreams, 6 different ways of processing the trauma that had brought them together. Michael graduated high school with honors despite working 20 hours a week to help support the family. He'd been accepted to community college for mechanical engineering, but the tuition might as well have been $1 million. Denise watched him hide his acceptance letter in his drawer, pretending it didn't matter, and she lay awake that night trying to figure out how to make the impossible possible. The answer came from an unexpected source: Mrs. Rodriguez, her elderly neighbor who'd been watching their family grow with quiet admiration. She knocked on Denise's door one evening with an envelope containing $2,000, her late husband's pension money she'd been saving for something important. "Mija," she said to a tearful Denise, "I've been watching you raise those babies for years. I've seen how they look at you, how they trust you, how they've grown into good people because you loved them when nobody else would. That boy deserved his education, and you deserve to see your son succeed. Emotional pause. Michael cried when Denise told him about Mrs. Rodriguez's gift. 18 years old, 6 feet tall, with callous hands and eyes that had seen too much, and he cried like the child he'd never really gotten to be. "Mama, Dee," he whispered, "how do I ever pay this back?" "Baby," Denise said, holding this young man who'd been holding up the world for so long. "You pay it forward. You become the man I know you are, and someday, when you see someone who needs help, you'll remember what it felt like to receive it." David found his calling through a church youth group, where his songs about redemption and second chances caught the attention of a local music producer. At 17, he was offered a recording contract, small, local, but real. The advance wasn't much, but it was enough to help with groceries and to give him hope that his voice could be his future. Sarah's work with animals led to a scholarship opportunity for veterinary studies. Her grades had improved steadily under Denise's patient tutoring, and her gentle way with wounded creatures had caught the attention of the shelter's veterinarian, who mentored her through high school and helped her navigate college applications. Lisa, the quiet one who'd found her voice again in this house of healing, discovered she had a gift for writing. Her essays about family and resilience won local contests, earning small cash prizes as she always insisted on contributing to household expenses. "This family invested in me," she'd say. "Now I invest back." And through it all, Marcus and Keisha continued to thrive. Marcus earned a full scholarship to Wayne State University for engineering. Keisha, now managing her diabetes with the independence of someone who'd learned early that self-care was survival, was accepted to nursing school with plans to work in pediatric care. But success, even small success, comes with its own challenges. As the children grew older and more independent, they began to see their situation with adult eyes. They understood, finally, what Denise had sacrificed for them. Michael figured it out first. During his sophomore year of college, he was studying in the library when he decided to research the costs of raising children in single-parent households. The numbers were staggering. The cost of feeding 6 growing children, the medical expenses, the clothes and school supplies, and all the 1,000 things that growing children need. He went home that night and found Denise asleep at the kitchen table, her head down on a pile of bills, her work uniform still on at midnight. That's when he noticed things he'd been too young to see before. How thin she'd become over the years. How her work uniforms hung loose on a frame that had once been fuller. How she ate smaller portions at dinner, always claiming she wasn't that hungry, always making sure the children had seconds before she considered thirds for herself. He looked through their family photos and saw the gradual transformation. The woman who'd taken them and had been vibrant, full-figured, quick to laugh. The woman sleeping over unpaid bills was worn thin, aged beyond her years, beautiful but fragile in a way that spoke of too many sacrifices made too quietly. The next morning, Michael confronted her gently. "Mama D, when's the last time you bought yourself something that wasn't for us?" Denise, caught off guard by the question, couldn't answer, because the truth was she couldn't remember. Every dollar had gone to them for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to want something for herself. "Baby, I have everything I need," she said, the same response she'd given for years. "No, you don't," Michael said quietly. "You have everything we need. There's a difference." By 2015, the impossible had happened. All 6 children were succeeding despite every odd stacked against them. Michael was in his final year of engineering school, working full-time and sending money home whenever he could. David had signed with a small Christian music label and was touring regionally, his songs about redemption and family touching audiences across the Midwest. Sarah had graduated high school with honors and was starting her pre-veterinary program on a full scholarship. Marcus was thriving in his engineering program, already being recruited by automotive companies. Keisha was excelling in nursing school, her own experience with chronic illness making her extraordinarily empathetic with pediatric patients. And Lisa, now 18, had been accepted to Northwestern University's journalism program with a full scholarship based on her essay about growing up in an unconventional family. Success should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like the beginning of goodbye. One by one, her children were spreading their wings, preparing to fly into futures that would take them far from the small apartment where they'd learned to heal. College acceptance letters arrived like mixed blessings, cause for celebration and heartbreak in equal measure. Denise had always known this day would come. She'd raised them to be independent, to chase their dreams, to build lives bigger than the circumstances that had brought them together. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are two very different things. The apartment began to feel different as graduation approached. Boxes appeared in corners as the older children sorted through belongings, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. The dinner table conversations turned to logistics, moving dates, dorm room assignments, career plans that would scatter them across the country. Michael was the first to leave. His engineering degree had earned him a position with Ford Motor Company in Dearborn, good money, benefits. The kind of stable future that had once seemed impossible for a boy who'd aged out of the system at 18 in all but name. The night before he moved out, he sat with Denise on the front steps of their building, both of them avoiding the conversation they needed to have. "I'm scared," he finally admitted. "Of what, baby? Of forgetting where I came from. Of becoming the kind of person who doesn't remember what it's like to be hungry. Of getting so caught up in my new life that I forget about the woman who made it possible." Denise took his hand. This hand that had once been small enough to fit entirely in her palm, now larger than her own, callous from work and strong enough to build bridges and fix engines and create things that mattered. "Michael, you listen to me. You were never broken, baby. You were hurt, yes. Scared, absolutely. But never broken. All I did was give you a safe place to remember who you really were underneath all that pain. The man you're becoming, that was always in you. I just made sure nobody could take it away." David left 3 months later, following his music to Nashville, where a producer had offered him a real recording contract. Sarah left for college that fall, already planning to come back to Detroit after graduation to work with urban animals in underserved communities. Marcus moved into engineering housing at Wayne State, close enough to visit on weekends, but far enough to feel like a real departure. Keisha was the last to leave, finishing nursing school and accepting a position at Children's Hospital of Michigan. The night before she moved into her own apartment, she and Denise sat up talking until dawn. "Mama D," Keisha said, "do you ever regret it? Taking all of us? Your whole life could have been different. You could have remarried, traveled, had the life you planned before we came along." Denise looked at this young woman who'd grown from a frightened 8-year-old into a compassionate healer, whose diabetes had taught her to be advocates for herself and others, who'd chosen pediatric nursing specifically because she wanted to help children who felt as scared and vulnerable as she once had. "Baby girl," Denise said, "before you children came into my life, I thought I knew what love was. I thought love was what me and Jerome had, quiet and steady and predictable. But you 6 taught me that love isn't something you fall into. It's something you choose every day, especially on the days when it's hard. Especially on the days when it costs you everything you thought you wanted." Lisa was the hardest goodbye, partly because she was the youngest, partly because she'd lived the longest in the apartment that had become their sanctuary, but mostly because she was the last. The night before she left for Northwestern, the two of them sat at the kitchen table that had hosted 1,000 family meetings, homework sessions, heart-to-heart conversations, and celebrations of small victories that felt like major triumphs. "I wrote something for you," Lisa said, sliding a folded paper across the table. "Don't read it until after I'm gone. I don't want to cry any more today." Denise took the paper, knowing it would join the collection of cards, drawings, and letters she'd saved from all 6 children over the years. Tangible proof that love could indeed multiply without being divided. "Lisa, baby, you know you can come home whenever you need to, right? This will always be your home." Lisa nodded, but they both knew the truth that neither wanted to say out loud. This chapter of their lives was ending. College would lead to careers. Careers would lead to adult lives. Adult lives would lead to families and responsibilities, and new chapters written in cities far from Detroit. "Mama D," Lisa said, her voice steady despite the tears. "I need you to know something. You saved us. All of us. Not just from the system or from being separated, but from believing that we weren't worth saving. You showed us that family isn't about blood or paperwork or having enough money. It's about choosing to love people even when it's inconvenient, even when it's expensive, even when it's impossible. The next morning, Lisa left for Northwestern with 2 suitcases and a heart full of dreams that had been nurtured in a kitchen where love was served daily, even when the cupboards were nearly bare. And for the first time in 12 years, Denise Washington sat alone at her kitchen table, looking at 6 empty chairs and wondering who she was supposed to be now that her children didn't need her anymore. The apartment felt cavernous in its silence. The refrigerator, once a masterpiece of strategic organization to feed 6 growing bodies, now held food that would last her a week. The bathroom schedule that had once required a posted chart was now unnecessary. The noise complaints they feared from neighbors never materialized. Now she found herself missing even the sound of arguments over whose turn it was to do dishes. What she didn't know was that her real story, the story that would bring that black SUV to her door 10 years later, was just beginning. What she couldn't see was that the love she poured into 6 children was growing and multiplying in ways she couldn't imagine, creating ripples that would eventually become waves powerful enough to change not just their lives, but the lives of countless others. What she couldn't know was that the hardest part wasn't over. It was just beginning. Because sometimes the most difficult chapter of parenthood isn't raising children. It's learning to live without them when you've done your job so well that they don't need you anymore. But that's a lesson Denise would have to learn alone, one quiet evening at a time, until the day a familiar voice would call her name through a door she'd almost given up hope would ever open again. September 2016. The apartment that had once pulsed with the chaos of 6 lives suddenly felt like a museum of memories. Denise stood in the doorway of what had been the boys' room, looking at the space where bunk beds once stood, where whispered conversations about dreams and fears had stretched late into countless nights. The walls still bore the faint marks where David had hung his guitar, where Marcus had taped up his engineering diagrams, where Michael had kept a photo of his biological parents, the only picture that survived the fire. Now the room was clean, empty, and achingly quiet. For 12 years, Denise had dreamed of this moment. The moment when all her children would be successful, independent, pursuing the future she'd fought so hard to make possible. She just never imagined how lonely victory would feel. The phone calls came regularly at first. Michael called every Sunday from his apartment in Dearborn, updating her on his engineering projects and asking about her week, as if her days could possibly be as interesting as his. David called from Nashville between studio sessions, playing her snippets of songs he'd written about home and family and the woman who'd taught him that his voice mattered. Sarah called from Ann Arbor, where she was excelling in her veterinary program, sharing stories about the animals she was learning to heal and the professors who reminded her of Mama D's patient teaching style. Marcus called for his corporate internship, describing the skyscrapers and boardrooms that were becoming his second home. Keisha called from the hospital where she'd started her pediatric nursing career, telling Denise about the children she was caring for, how she used the patience and gentleness she'd learned at their kitchen table to help other scared kids feel safe. And Lisa called from Northwestern, where she was studying journalism and writing stories about families like theirs, unconventional, resilient, held together by choice rather than obligation. But slowly, gradually, the calls became less frequent, not because they loved her less, but because life was happening to them. Michael got promoted and started working longer hours. David's music career was taking off, with tours that took him away for weeks at a time. Sarah's veterinary program was intensive, demanding every moment of her attention. Marcus met a girl, started building a relationship that promised its own kind of future. Keisha was working night shifts, sleeping during the day when Denise was awake. Lisa was discovering the wider world of college, making friends, exploring interests that had nothing to do with the apartment on Detroit's South Side. This was what Denise had wanted, what she'd worked toward for 12 years. Independent, successful, confident young adults who could navigate the world without needing her constant guidance and protection. So why did success feel so much like loss? Christmas 2016 was the first Christmas when not everyone made it home. David was on tour with his band, playing churches across the South. His voice had found an audience hungry for songs about redemption and second chances, and he couldn't afford to turn down bookings, especially during the holiday season, when venues paid premium rates. Sarah was doing an emergency rotation at an animal hospital in Grand Rapids, caring for pets whose families couldn't afford to take time off work for their sick animals. She'd volunteered for the holiday shifts because she understood what it meant to have nowhere else to go during times when families were supposed to gather. Michael came home Christmas Eve but had to leave Christmas afternoon for a work emergency, some crisis at the plant that required his engineering expertise and couldn't wait until after the holidays. So Christmas dinner was Denise, Marcus, Keisha, and Lisa around a table that felt too big despite being set for 4 instead of 7. They went through the motions, graced traditional foods, the exchange of modest gifts bought with careful budgeting. But the empty chair spoke louder than any conversation. "It feels wrong," Lisa said quietly, echoing what they were all thinking. All those years we dreamed about having enough money for a real Christmas, and now that some of us do, we're not all together to enjoy it. Keisha, ever the peacemaker, tried to lighten the mood. They're out there living the lives Mama D fought to give them. That's the real Christmas miracle. But Denise saw the truth in Lisa's eyes, heard it in Marcus's careful silence. Success had scattered them to the winds, and she was beginning to understand that the price of raising children, well, was learning to let them go completely. That evening, Michael called from his apartment, his voice thick with exhaustion and something that might have been regret. "Mama D, I messed up. I should have been there today. Work isn't more important than family." "Baby," Denise said, settling into her chair by the window where she could see the building across the street where other families were cleaning up from their own Christmas celebrations. "Family isn't just about being in the same room. Family is about carrying each other in your hearts no matter where you are. You were here today, even when you weren't here. I felt you in every prayer, every story we shared, every moment we remembered how blessed we are." But privately, in the quiet of her own heart, Denise was beginning to wrestle with questions she'd never expected to face. Had she raised them too well? Had she made them so independent that they didn't need her anymore? Was this what empty nest syndrome felt like? Or was this something deeper, the recognition that the thing she'd done best in her life was creating a family so strong they could survive without her? 2017 brought more changes. Marcus graduated and immediately landed a position with a prestigious engineering firm in Chicago. The salary was more than Denise made in a year, and the benefits package included health care that would have seemed like science fiction to the woman who'd once chosen between Keisha's insulin and rent money. Keisha got promoted to charge nurse in the pediatric ICU, a position that came with both higher pay and greater responsibility. She was working with the sickest children in the hospital, using everything Denise had taught her about fighting for kids who couldn't fight for themselves. Lisa's journalism was getting noticed. Her articles about poverty, family, and resilience were being published in magazines and newspapers, reaching audiences far beyond anything they'd imagined when she first found her voice again in their crowded living room. Sarah was thriving in veterinary school, her gentle touch with traumatized animals earning her recognition from professors who saw in her the rare combination of technical skill and emotional intelligence that made for exceptional healers. David's music career was exploding in the best possible way. His album Songs from the Table had caught the attention of a major label, and suddenly he was being invited to perform at festivals and venues that had once seemed impossibly distant. Each phone call brought news of promotions, achievements, opportunities that validated every sacrifice Denise had made. She should have felt pride, and she did, but she also felt something she hadn't expected, a profound loneliness that success couldn't fill. The apartment felt like a shell of its former self. The bathroom that had once required a posted schedule for 6 people was now available whenever she needed it. The kitchen that had once been a hub of constant activity, homework supervision, meal preparation, heart-to-heart conversations over late-night snacks, was now quiet except for the sound of her own footsteps. Her grocery bill had dropped to a fraction of what it once was, but somehow having enough food in the refrigerator felt less satisfying than stretching a small amount to feed a large family. Having enough space felt less comfortable than the crowded intimacy of a home bursting with life and love. The phone calls began to spread out. Weekly became bi-weekly. Bi-weekly became monthly, not because they loved her less, but because life was pulling them forward into futures that demanded their full attention. Michael called to tell her about the woman he was dating, a kind, intelligent engineer who appreciated his work ethic and his loyalty to family. Denise listened to the happiness in his voice and felt her heart expand and contract simultaneously. He was building the life she dreamed for him, which meant he was building a life that didn't require her constant presence. David called from recording studios and concert venues, his voice hoarse from performing, but alive with the joy of doing what he loved. He was writing songs that were touching lives across the country, sharing the messages of hope and resilience he'd learned at their dinner table with audiences who needed to hear them. Sarah called from veterinary clinics, where she was developing innovative treatments for pets whose owners couldn't afford traditional care. She was creating sliding scale programs and charity initiatives, using her position to fight for animals the way Denise had once fought for unwanted children. It was during one of these increasingly rare phone calls that Denise began to fully understand what her 12 years of motherhood had cost her. Lisa was telling her about a journalism assignment where she'd interviewed successful women about work-life balance, and she'd asked a question that stopped Denise cold. "Mama D, what did you want to be when you grew up? Before everything changed, what were your dreams?" Denise sat in her quiet apartment, surrounded by the echoes of a family that had grown up and moved on, and realized she couldn't answer. Her dreams had been so completely consumed by theirs that she'd forgotten she'd ever had any. She wanted to go back to school once, to study social work, and maybe help other families navigate the system that had nearly separated them. She wanted to travel, to see the ocean, to visit places she'd only read about in the travel magazines at the doctor's office. She wanted to fall in love again, maybe to find someone who could appreciate the depth of her capacity for love without needing to be rescued by it. But all of that had been set aside, gladly and willingly, for 12 years of making sure 6 children had everything they needed to become the adults they were meant to be. "I wanted to make a difference," Denise finally said, her voice soft with the weight of recognition. "I wanted to matter." "Mama D," Lisa said, and Denise could hear the tears in her voice, "you changed 6 lives completely. You didn't just make a difference. You made miracles happen every single day for 12 years. How is that not matching?" After the call ended, Denise sat in the growing darkness of her apartment, not bothering to turn on the lights. The truth was settling into her bones like winter cold. She had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. All 6 children were not just surviving, but thriving. They were good people, successful people, people who would make the world better because they understood what it meant to be loved unconditionally. But success in parenting, she was learning, meant working yourself out of a job so completely that the people you loved most didn't need you anymore. The months that followed Lisa's departure were the longest of Denise's life. She'd gone from managing the schedules, needs, dreams, and daily crises of 6 different people to having only herself to worry about. The transition was jarring in ways she hadn't anticipated. She'd wake up at 5 a.m. out of habit. Then remember she didn't need to prepare 6 lunches or check the weather for 6 different school pickup times. She'd buy groceries and automatically calculate portions for a large family before remembering she was shopping for one. The worst part was the silence. For 12 years, her home had been filled with music. David's guitar, Sarah's humming, the sound of children arguing and laughing and living out loud. Now the quiet was so complete it felt oppressive. Her co-workers at the school cafeteria began to worry about her. "Denise, you did good," her supervisor, Ms. Johnson, told her one afternoon. "All 6 of those babies are thriving. Because of you. You should be proud." "I am proud," Denise replied, ladling mac and cheese on a lunch trays with the mechanical precision of someone who'd been doing the same job for 15 years. I don't know who I am when I'm not being their mother." The phone calls became monthly, then sporadic, not because her children loved her less, but because they were busy building the lives she'd equipped them to build. Michael got engaged to his engineer girlfriend and was saving for a house. David's music was being played on Christian radio stations across the South. Sarah was top of her veterinary class and already being recruited by prestigious clinics. Marcus had been promoted twice and was talking about pursuing an MBA. Keisha was being considered for a supervisory position at the hospital. Lisa was thriving at Northwestern, her articles about social justice and family being published in major publications. Each success felt like a small death and resurrection all at once. They were becoming everything she dreamed they could be, which meant they were becoming people who didn't need a woman working 3 jobs to scrape together enough love and resources to keep them afloat. And Denise was left to figure out who she was when she wasn't Mama D to 6 children who needed her more than air itself. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent 12 years dreaming of financial stability, of having enough money to breathe easily, of not going to bed every night worrying about tomorrow's challenges. Now she had enough money for herself. Her expenses had dropped dramatically with only one person's support, but she would have traded every moment of financial peace for the beautiful chaos of her children needing her again. She developed new routines to fill the silence. Monday night grocery shopping, not because she needed much, but because it gave her something to do. Wednesday evening phone calls to Mrs. Rodriguez, who understood the particular loneliness of having raised children who'd grown beyond their need for daily mothering. Friday night movies by herself, usually falling asleep on the couch that had once been Michael's bed. The weekends were the hardest. Saturdays and Sundays had always been family time, cooking big meals together, helping with homework, listening to David play guitar, while the younger ones did crafts at the kitchen table. Now weekends stretched endlessly, marked only by the sound of neighbors' families and her own memories. Christmas 2018 was a turning point, though Denise didn't recognize it at the time. For the first time in 3 years, all 6 children came home for the holidays. Not because they had to. They all had other options now, other places they could have spent Christmas, but because they wanted to, because something was pulling them back to the apartment where they'd learned what family really meant. Michael arrived first, driving a car that was reliable and paid for, carrying gifts that represented the financial stability he'd achieved. But when he hugged Denise at the door, she noticed something in his eyes that hadn't been there when he was 14 and angry at the world. "Mama D," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something. I've been talking to the others, and we've all realized something we should have figured out years ago." David arrived next, guitar case in hand, followed by Sarah with stories about the animal clinic, where she was now working as a full veterinarian. Marcus came with his fiancée, Jennifer, a lovely woman who'd heard so many stories about Mama D that she felt like she was meeting a legend. Keisha arrived last, tired from a long shift at the hospital, but radiant with the satisfaction of work that mattered. Lisa came from college with notebooks full of stories and a confidence that had grown from the shy 6-year-old who'd once whispered everything. That evening, as they sat around the kitchen table that had somehow expanded to accommodate 8 people, Michael stood up and cleared his throat. "We need to say something," he began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd learned to speak with family when words mattered most. "We've all been living our lives, pursuing our careers, building our futures, and we've been so focused on moving forward that we forgot to look back and really see what happened here." He gestured around the small apartment that suddenly felt full again, alive again, like it was remembering its true purpose. "We all know Mama D sacrificed for us. We've always known that. But I don't think we understood until we were adults just how much she gave up, how completely she rearranged her entire life around 6 children who weren't hers by law or blood, but became hers by choice." David spoke next, his musician's voice carrying melody even in conversation. "I was talking to my producer last month about the songs I've written about family and home, and he asked me where I learned about unconditional love. I told him about you, Mama D, and he said something that's been haunting me. Most people love others because of who they are. It sounded like she loved you because of who she saw you could become." Sarah, now Dr. Sarah to her colleagues, but still baby girl to Denise, wiped tears from her eyes. "I work with animals every day who've been abandoned, abused, written off as hopeless. And every time I help one heal, I think about how you saw past our trauma to who we really were underneath. You didn't just love us, you believed in us when we couldn't believe in ourselves." Marcus, the engineer who'd learned precision and planning at this very table, pulled out a folder. "We've been talking, all of us, and we've done some calculations. We figured out what it cost you to raise us. Not just money, but opportunities, dreams, the life you could have had if you'd chosen differently. The numbers are staggering. Mama D, 6 children for 12 years. Food, clothes, medical care, school expenses, Christmas gifts bought with money you didn't have. But that's not even the real cost. The real cost was every promotion you didn't take, because it would have meant longer hours away from us. Every opportunity you passed up, because we needed you more. Every dream you deferred, because our dreams came first. Keisha leaned forward, her nurse's hands gentle as they covered Denise's trembling fingers. We calculated that you spent approximately $300,000 raising us. Money you didn't have. Money you earned by working yourself to exhaustion. Money you borrowed against your own future because you believed in ours. Lisa, the writer who'd learned to find truth in stories, spoke last. But the money isn't even the real sacrifice. The real sacrifice was time. 12 years of your life when you could have been building your own career, your own relationships, your own dreams. You gave us your 40s and your 50s, your prime adult years, because you believed we were worth it. Denise looked around the table at these 6 magnificent adults who'd grown from broken children into healers, creators, builders, leaders. She saw Michael, who uses engineering skills to volunteer with Habitat for Humanity on weekends. David, whose music was inspiring faith and hope in people across the country. Sarah, who was developing programs to provide veterinary care for families who couldn't afford it. Marcus, who was mentoring young engineers from underprivileged backgrounds. Keisha, who became a nurse that scared children trusted implicitly. Lisa, whose journalism was shining light on stories that needed to be told. You want to know the truth? Denise said finally, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. Every sacrifice was worth it. Every sleepless night. Every empty stomach. Every moment I wondered how we'd make it to tomorrow. Worth it. Because look at you. Look what you've become. Look how you're changing the world. But Michael wasn't finished. That's exactly the problem, Mama D. You're proud of us, but you've forgotten to be proud of yourself. You spent so long taking care of everyone else that you never learned to let anyone take care of you. David nodded. We've all been talking, and we've realized something. We're successful because you sacrificed everything for us. But that means you sacrificed everything, period. Your dreams, your goals, your own future, all gone so we could have ours. And that's not okay, Sarah said firmly. It's not okay that the woman who taught us we were worthy of love has never learned to believe she's worthy of being loved and cared for in return. Marcus opened the folder he'd been holding. We've each been setting aside money for the past 2 years. We've created a fund, call it back payment for services rendered, or investment in the woman who invested in us first. The check he slid across the table made Denise's vision blur. More money than she'd seen in one place in her entire life. Enough to change everything. This isn't charity, Lisa said quickly, seeing the protest forming on Denise's lips. This is family taking care of family. This is us finally being old enough and successful enough to give back a fraction of what you gave us. We've also been talking about something else, Keisha said, her nurse's voice gentle but firm. You've spent 12 years making sure we had everything we needed to succeed. Now it's time for you to figure out what you need to succeed. What you want to do with the rest of your life now that you don't have to spend every moment worried about keeping 6 kids fed and housed and safe. Denise stared at the check, at the 6 faces she loved more than her own life, at the impossible generosity that she'd somehow inspired by choosing to be generous when she had nothing to give. I don't know, she admitted. I don't know who I am when I'm not taking care of you. I don't know what I want when I don't have to want for you first. Michael leaned forward. This young man who'd once run away because he was afraid to hope, now successful enough to take care of the woman who'd first taught him that hope was possible. Then, that's what you're going to figure out. You're going to learn to dream again, Mama D. You're going to remember that you're not just our mother. You're Denise Washington, and she deserves to have a life that's about more than sacrifice. That Christmas marked the beginning of a new phase in their relationship. Instead of Denise giving everything and the children receiving, they began to function like the healthy adult family they become, supporting each other, sharing resources, making decisions together. The money her children had given her sat in a savings account for months, while Denise wrestled with what to do with it. She'd been poor for so long that having resources felt almost foreign. She'd been needed for so long that not being needed felt like losing her identity. Slowly, with encouragement from all 6 children who called and visited and refused to let her disappear into the background of their success. Denise began to remember the woman she'd been before she became their mother. She enrolled in social work classes at the community college. Using her decades of experience navigating systems and advocating for children to help other families facing similar challenges, she started volunteering with a local organization that helped single mothers, sharing the hard-won wisdom she'd gained from 12 years of making impossible things possible. And slowly, gradually, she began to build a life that was about more than survival, more than sacrifice, more than ensuring that other people's dreams could come true. But she still missed them. Every day, in ways both large and small, she missed the beautiful chaos of being needed by people she loved more than herself. She missed Michael's protective instincts and his unexpected moments of vulnerability. She missed David's music, filling their small space with hope. She missed Sarah's gentle humming and her gift for making wounded things feel safe. She missed Marcus's steady reliability and his way of making everyone feel heard. She missed Keisha's emotional intelligence and her ability to sense when someone needed extra love. She missed Lisa's stories and her growing confidence in her own voice. But most of all, she missed being the center of a universe where love multiplied daily, where every challenge was met with collective determination, where success was measured not in individual achievements, but in the strength of their bonds to each other. What Denise didn't know was that her children missed it too. What she couldn't see was that despite their success, despite their independence, despite their adult lives filled with career demands and new relationships, they all carried a hollowness that success couldn't fill. What she didn't understand was that in teaching them to be independent, she'd accidentally taught them to be alone. In preparing them for the world, she'd forgotten to prepare herself for the world without them. And what none of them realized was that the story they thought was ending was actually just pausing, waiting for the right moment to reveal that the love they'd shared had been growing and multiplying in ways they couldn't see, creating a legacy that would soon come full circle in the most unexpected way possible. Because sometimes the people we raise to fly away are actually learning how to fly back to us, carrying gifts we never imagined and solutions to problems we'd stopped believing could be solved. Sometimes love doesn't just echo through time. It builds to a crescendo that can be heard across decades. But first, Denise had to learn to live with the silence of success. Time has a peculiar way of moving when you're no longer racing against it. For 12 years, Denise had lived in a constant state of urgency. 6 children meant 6 sets of needs that couldn't wait, 6 schedules to coordinate, 6 futures to worry about simultaneously. Every day had been a sprint from dawn to midnight. Every decision weighted with consequences for multiple lives. Now, time moved differently, slower, quieter, sometimes so slowly that Denise found herself counting the hours until something, anything, would require her attention. She'd moved to a smaller apartment in 2019, trading the 2-bedroom that had housed a family of 7 for a modest 1-bedroom that was perfect for a woman living alone. The move had been practical. Why pay for space she didn't need? But walking through those empty rooms one last time, it felt like dismantling a sacred space. She'd stood in the kitchen where they'd shared thousands of meals, where homework had been supervised and hearts had been mended and dreams had been nurtured. She'd run her fingers along the doorframe where they'd marked the children's heights every year, watching Michael shoot up past 6 feet, seeing Sarah catch up to her age-appropriate growth once proper nutrition and love had worked their magic. The new apartment was nice, clean, quiet. It had everything a single woman needed and nothing she didn't. But it didn't have the soul that had been created by years of children's laughter echoing off the walls, by whispered conversations after bedtime, by the beautiful chaos of a family that had chosen each other daily. Her social work classes provided some structure, some purpose. At 57, Denise was one of the older students, but her life experience made textbook theories come alive in ways that impressed her professors. She understood trauma and resilience not from academic study, but from watching 6 children heal in real time. Ms. Washington, her professor, Dr. Martinez, said after class one day, "Have you considered that your experience might be valuable beyond just helping other families? Have you thought about writing about it or speaking about it? The world needs to hear stories like yours." But Denise struggled with the idea of making her children's pain into public inspiration. Their trauma belonged to them, not to her. Their healing was their victory, not hers to claim. And the idea of being seen as some kind of hero sat uncomfortably with a woman who'd only done what love required. "I just did what any mother would do," she'd say when people praised her choices. But the truth was more complicated than that. Most mothers didn't have to make the choices she'd made. Most mothers didn't have to decide between their own meals and their children's medication. Most mothers didn't have to turn love into a mathematical equation where everything had to be stretched, multiplied, and made to last longer than it was meant to. The children, she still thought of them as her children, even though the youngest was now 24, maintained contact, but their lives were pulling them in directions that had nothing to do with the south side of Detroit. Michael had been promoted to senior engineer and was traveling frequently for work. His calls came from airports and hotel rooms, his voice tired but satisfied. He bought a house in the suburbs, a beautiful place with a guest room he kept insisting was Mama D's room, even though she'd only visited twice. "You should come stay for a week," he'd say during their monthly calls. "Jennifer loves having you here, and you'd love the neighborhood. It's quiet, safe, good schools for when we have kids." The mention of future grandchildren always made Denise's heart skip. She'd be a grandmother someday, probably soon, which meant a whole new kind of love to learn, a whole new way to be needed. David's career had exploded beyond anyone's expectations. His album Songs from the Table had gone platinum, and he was touring nationally now, his music reaching audiences who'd never heard his story but felt his truth in every note. He bought a house in Nashville and was writing songs for other artists, but he still called Denise before every major performance. "I need to hear your voice before I go on stage," he'd tell her. "You're still my good luck charm, Mama D." Sarah had opened her own veterinary practice, specializing in working with rescue animals and providing sliding scale services for families who couldn't afford traditional vet care. She was living the life Denise had dreamed for her, using her gifts to heal others while staying connected to her own experience of being rescued. Marcus had gotten married to Jennifer in a beautiful ceremony where Denise sat in the front row, officially listed as Mother the Groom on wedding programs that made her cry with pride. They bought a house in Oak Park, not far from where Denise and Jerome had once dreamed of raising children of their own. Keisha had been promoted to nurse manager of the pediatric ICU, overseeing a department that saved the lives of critically ill children every day. She bought a condo downtown and was dating a doctor who understood her calling and supported her passion for helping families navigate medical crises. Lisa had graduated from Northwestern with honors and landed a job with a major magazine, writing feature stories about social justice and family resilience. Her articles about foster care and adoption were changing conversations and influencing policy, giving voice to children who'd been voiceless the way she'd once been. But as their lives became more complex, more demanding, more successful, the calls became shorter, less frequent, more focused on practical updates than emotional connection. "How are you doing, Mama D?" They'd ask, but the question had become rhetorical. How could she explain that she was doing fine, financially stable, physically healthy, emotionally empty, when they were clearly thriving in ways that validated every sacrifice she'd made? How could she tell them that success felt like loss when their success was everything she'd worked toward? How could she admit that she missed being needed when being no longer needed was proof that she'd succeeded as a mother? Then came the pandemic, and suddenly the world understood what Denise had been feeling for years, the profound isolation of being separated from the people you love most. The lockdowns affected everyone differently. For Denise, working in a school cafeteria that was suddenly closed to students, it meant being furloughed for months with minimal income and too much time to think. For her children, scattered across the country in various careers, it meant suddenly understanding what their Mama D had been experiencing in her quiet apartment. The weight of silence, the ache of missing family, the strange discomfort of having enough space and no one to share it with. The phone calls increased dramatically during those first months of lockdown, not just to check in, but to really talk. Michael called from his empty engineering office where he was working alone on projects that had once required team collaboration. David called from his Nashville studio where he was recording songs about isolation that had never felt more relevant. Sarah called from her veterinary practice where she was seeing animals suffer from the anxiety of their own isolated owners. For the first time in years, they were all experiencing what Denise had been living with since they'd grown up and moved away. The particular loneliness of being successful, but separate from the people who mattered most. "Mama D," Lisa said during one of their weekly video calls, "I'm writing an article about pandemic loneliness, and I keep thinking about you. You've been living in pandemic isolation for years, haven't you? Ever since we all left." The observation was so accurate it took Denise's breath away. Yes, she'd been living in social distancing since 2018, not because of virus, but because success had scattered her family to places where they could thrive independently. "I'm proud of all of you," Denise said, which was true but not the whole truth. "But are you happy?" Michael asked bluntly. "Really happy? Not proud of us happy or glad we're successful happy, but genuinely, personally happy with your own life?" It was the question Denise had been avoiding for 3 years. The question that forced her to confront the reality that she'd been so focused on their happiness that she'd forgotten how to pursue her own. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't remember what that feels like." As the world began to reopen, something had shifted in their family dynamic. The pandemic had reminded all of them what isolation felt like, and it had made them more intentional about connection. Michael started calling twice a week instead of once a month. David began sending her voice messages from the road, sharing stories about his performances and the people he met who reminded him of home. Sarah started a tradition of Sunday afternoon video calls where she'd show Denise around her veterinary practice, introducing her to the animals she was helping and the families whose lives she was touching. Marcus and Jennifer began including Denise in their family planning conversations, asking her advice about neighborhoods and schools and the 1,000 decisions that come with preparing to raise children. Keisha started sending care packages, not because Denise needed them, but because it felt good to reverse the flow of caretaking after years of being on the receiving end. Lisa began writing letters, old-fashioned, handwritten letters that arrived every few weeks, filled with observations about the world and memories of their shared past and gratitude for lessons that were still shaping her adult life. "Dear Mama D," one letter began, "I was interviewing a CEO today about her success story, and she mentioned that her mother had been her greatest influence. She said, 'My mother taught me that love is a finite resource. The more you give, the more you have.' I almost laughed out loud because I knew exactly where that philosophy came from. You didn't just teach us to be successful. You taught us that success without love is just expensive loneliness. Thank you for making sure we'd never have to choose between achievement and compassion." These letters became Denise's treasures, proof that the love she'd invested was continuing to grow and multiply in ways she was only beginning to understand. Marcus and Jennifer's first baby arrived in March 2022, a little girl they named Denise Marie, after the woman who'd taught them both what unconditional love looked like. When Denise held her first grandchild, feeling those tiny fingers wrap around hers, she understood the first time that love really could bridge generations. "She's going to know her Grandma D," Marcus promised, tears in his eyes as he watched his mother hold his daughter. "She's going to grow up hearing stories about the woman who saved her daddy and his whole family." Michael and his wife announced their engagement, with plans for a wedding where Denise would walk down the aisle as mother the groom because, as Michael put it, "You're the only mother I've ever really had." David's music had evolved to include songs about legacy and intergenerational love, inspired by watching his Mama D discover what it meant to be a grandmother. His concerts now included stories about the woman who'd taught him that broken things could be made beautiful again. But even these beautiful developments couldn't fill the daily emptiness of an apartment that echoed with memories instead of living voices. Denise was proud, prouder than she'd ever imagined being. But pride, she was learning, was a complicated emotion when it came mixed with loneliness. Her social work classes had led to a part-time position with Child Protective Services, where she used her experience to advocate for keeping families together whenever possible. She was good at her job, better than good, because she understood both sides of the equation, the systems that needed to protect children and the families that needed to be preserved. But even meaningful work couldn't completely fill the space left by 12 years of being essential to people she loved more than her own life. Late at night, in the quiet of her one-bedroom apartment, Denise found herself wrestling with questions that had no easy answers. Had she loved them too well? Had she made them so independent that they didn't need her anymore? Was this what successful parenting felt like? The strange combination of pride and loss, of accomplishment and emptiness? She'd given them everything she had, and they'd used it to build beautiful lives that were full of purpose and meaning and success. But in giving them everything, had she somehow given herself away so completely that there was nothing left? The money they'd given her sat mostly untouched in her savings account, earning interest that felt pointless when she had no one to spend it on. She'd used some for her education, some for modest improvements to her life, but the bulk of it remained, a symbol of their gratitude that somehow felt more like proof of the distance between them. She'd drive through their old neighborhood sometimes, past the building where they'd lived together for so many years. The current tenants had painted the door a different color, but she could still see them all in her mind. 6 children of different ages and backgrounds learning to trust that love could be permanent, that family could be chosen, that home was wherever someone fought for you to stay. She'd wonder if they ever drove past that building, too, if they ever missed the crowded chaos of those years, when every day was a struggle but they faced it together. She'd wonder if they understood that while their success was her greatest achievement, it was also her greatest loss. Christmas 2022 was different. Not bad, exactly, but different in ways that highlighted how much had changed. Michael and his wife were spending Christmas with her family in California, a decision that made perfect sense but still stung. David was performing at a Christmas concert series in Atlanta, his music career requiring him to work when others celebrated. Sarah was covering emergency shifts at her clinic because animals got sick on holidays and someone had to care for them. Marcus and Jennifer came for a Christmas dinner with baby Denise, and Keisha made it home for 2 days between hospital shifts. Lisa video called from a journalism assignment in New York, where she was covering how families cope with holiday loneliness. Sitting around a table set for 4 instead of 7, holding her granddaughter while Marcus and Jennifer and Keisha shared stories about their adult lives, Denise felt the weight of time's passage in ways that were both beautiful and heartbreaking. This was what she worked toward. Children who were successful enough to have choices about how to spend their holidays, careers that mattered enough to require sacrifice, adult relationships that created new obligations and new sources of joy. But it was also the confirmation of what she'd been feeling for years. The family they created together had been a moment in time, beautiful and transformative and ultimately temporary. They were all moving forward into futures that honored what they'd learned from each other, but didn't require daily connection to sustain. "Mama D," Keisha said, watching Denise hold her granddaughter with the practiced ease of someone who'd comforted countless children. "Do you miss it? The chaos, when we were all here and you couldn't get 5 minutes apiece." Denise looked down at baby Denise Marie, whose dark eyes seemed to hold the same curiosity and intelligence she'd seen in all her children at various ages. This little girl would grow up knowing she was wanted, knowing she was safe, knowing that love was abundant rather than scarce. She'd never experienced the trauma that had brought the others to Denise's door, but she'd benefit from the wisdom that trauma had taught them all. "I miss being needed," Denise said honestly. "I miss feeling like the most important person in someone's world. I miss having problems that mattered more than my own." Marcus reached over and squeezed his mother's hand. "You know you're still the most important person in our worlds, right? Just because we don't need you to pack our lunches doesn't mean we don't need you. It just means we need you differently now." But differently was the key word. They needed her for advice, for emotional support, for the kind of unconditional love that could only come from someone who'd chosen to love them when they were at their most unlovable. But they didn't need her for survival anymore, and survival had been her specialty for so long that she wasn't sure who she was without it. The call came on a Tuesday morning in April 2023. Denise was getting ready for her shift at Child Protective Services when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. "Ms. Washington, this is Dr. Rebecca Chun from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. We'd like to invite you to accept an award for your contributions to child welfare in our state." Denise almost hung up, assuming it was some kind of scam. Awards were for people who did extraordinary things, not for women who'd simply refused to let children be separated when they'd already lost everything else. "I think you have the wrong person," Denise said. Are you the Denise Washington who provided care for 6 children between 2002 and 2016? Who kept sibling groups together when the system wanted to separate them? Who worked multiple jobs to ensure that children in your care had access to medical treatment, education, and emotional support? I'm a mother who took care of her children, Denise replied carefully. Ms. Washington, your case has been studied by social workers across the state. The outcomes for the children in your care exceeded every statistical prediction. All 6 achieved educational success, career stability, and emotional health at rates that are virtually unprecedented for children with their trauma backgrounds. You've been nominated for the State Child Advocate Award by multiple colleagues who've seen your work with families in crisis. The award ceremony was held in Lansing, in a conference room full of social workers, child advocates, and government officials who spoke about best practices and innovative approaches to family preservation. Denise sat uncomfortably in a dress she bought specifically for the occasion, feeling like an imposter among people with advanced degrees and official titles. When they called her name, she walked to the podium feeling like she was accepting recognition for breathing, something so natural and necessary that praise seemed absurd. I don't know why I'm getting an award for loving children, she said into the microphone, her voice barely audible. Love isn't innovative. Love isn't a policy or a program or a best practice. Love is just what you do when someone needs you and you have something to give. The applause that followed was different from the polite recognition she'd heard for other recipients. It was warmer, more personal, the kind of applause that comes from people who understood that sometimes the most profound truths are also the simplest ones. But driving home from Lansing with a plaque that proclaimed her a child welfare champion, Denise felt more disconnected than ever from the life that had earned her the recognition. The award was for something she'd done in the past, for a version of herself that had existed when she was needed in ways that mattered life or death. Who was she now? What was she supposed to do with the recognition for a job that had ended when she'd succeeded too completely? Summer 2023 brought visits that felt both wonderful and bittersweet. Michael and his wife came for a long weekend, and Denise watched him move through her small apartment with the careful attention of someone cataloging changes. She was thinner than he'd like to see, quieter. There was a sadness in her eyes that success hadn't cured. Mama D, he said on their last evening, as they sat on her small balcony watching the sunset. Are you lonely? The directness of the question caught her off guard. Michael had always been the truth-teller in their family, the one who called things by their real names even when those names were uncomfortable. I'm adjusting, she said carefully. That's not what I asked. Yes, she admitted. I'm lonely. Not all the time, not in ways that feel sorry for myself, but yes. I spent 12 years being the center of the universe, where love was the most important currency, where every day mattered because someone needed me to make it matter. Now I'm successful at being alone, and I never want to be successful at that. Michael was quiet for a long time, watching the city lights begin to twinkle as darkness settled over Detroit. Finally, he spoke. We all feel it too, you know. The emptiness. We thought independence would feel like freedom, but mostly it feels like separation. We're all successful, but we're successful individually instead of together. We learn how to thrive, but we learn it so well that we forgot how to need each other. Maybe, he continued, it's time for us to figure out how to be a family again. Not the family we were when we needed you to survive, but the family we could be now that we're all strong enough to take care of each other. That conversation planted a seed that would grow over the following months as Michael shared it with his siblings, as they all began to recognize that success without connection was just another form of poverty. But none of them could have predicted how dramatically that seed would bloom, or how soon the universe would provide an opportunity for them to show Denise that family wasn't something you aged out of. It was something you grew into deeper and stronger and more beautiful with each passing year. What none of them knew was that the love Denise had invested in them was earning interest in ways that couldn't be measured in bank accounts or awards or individual achievements. It was growing into something larger, something powerful enough to change not just their lives, but the lives of everyone they touched. What none of them realized was that the greatest gift was still coming. Not because they'd finally earned enough to repay her, but because love like hers doesn't seek repayment. It seeks multiplication. And sometimes When you've loved completely enough for long enough, the universe conspires to show you just how far that love has traveled and how many lives it's touched along the way. But first, there will be one more season of waiting, one more year of wondering if the sacrifice had been worth it, one more period of quiet that will make the coming storm of gratitude all the more powerful when it finally arrived. Because the best gifts aren't always the ones you expect. Sometimes they're the ones you never dreamed possible, delivered by people who've learned that love isn't a debt to be repaid. It's a legacy to be continued. And so we return to where our story began, that quiet Tuesday afternoon in October, when Denise Washington sat at her kitchen table, coffee growing cold, staring at 4 empty chairs that held more memories than most people accumulate in a lifetime. But now you understand the weight of those empty chairs. Now you know the story behind the silence that had become her daily companion. Now you can feel the ache of a woman who'd succeeded so completely at raising children that she'd succeeded herself right out of the job that had defined her for 12 years. The black SUV pulled up to her building at exactly 3:17 p.m. Denise noted the time because precision had become a habit during years of managing complex schedules for 6 different lives. But precision couldn't prepare her for what was about to happen. From her second-floor window, she watched a man in an expensive suit step out of the driver's seat, tall, confident, moving with a kind of purposeful stride that spoke of someone who was used to being listened to when he spoke. Even from 2 floors up, even after 10 years, she recognized the set of his shoulders, the way he held his head, the protective awareness that had never quite left him even as success had softened his edges. Michael. But this wasn't the Michael she remembered from their last visit. This wasn't even a successful engineer who called her monthly and sent photos of a suburban house. This was someone who moved like he was on a mission, like he was carrying news that couldn't wait for scheduled phone calls or planned visits. Behind him, 3 other car doors opened. David emerged from the passenger seat, and even from a distance, Denise could see he'd filled out, grown into the kind of presence that commanded stages and recording studios. But there was something urgent in his movements, something that reminded her of the boy who used to pace their small living room when he was working through problems too big for words. Sarah climbed out of the back seat, her veterinarian's coat visible under her jacket, suggesting she come straight from work. Her gentle demeanor was unchanged, but there was a determination in her posture that spoke of someone who'd learned to fight for what mattered. And Lisa stepped out last, notebook in hand like always, but moving with the confidence of someone who'd learned that her voice deserved to be heard. She was looking up at the building with an expression Denise couldn't quite read from her window, something between nostalgia and excitement, like someone returning to a place that held secrets she was finally ready to reveal. For sets of footsteps on the stairs. For people who'd once lived in her home but now moved to the world as adults with their own homes, their own lives, their own reasons for being anywhere they chose to be. And they'd chosen to be here, together, on a Tuesday afternoon when they should have been at work, in studios, in operating rooms, in newsrooms, anywhere but climbing the stairs to an apartment they'd outgrown years ago. The knock came exactly as it had in our opening scene. 3 deliberate raps that carried weight and intention. But now you understand why Denise's hands trembled as she approached the door. This wasn't just unexpected visitors. This was her past meeting her present, her children returning to the place where they'd learned that love could transform everything. Ms. Washington? Michael's voice carried through the door, formal in a way that made her heart skip. He'd called her Mama D for over 20 years. Why was he using her last name? My name is Michael. I believe you know my siblings, David, Sarah, and Lisa. The coffee cup hit the floor exactly as we saw before. Ceramic fragments scattering across linoleum that had been replaced twice over the years, but never quite lost the scuff marks from 6 children learning to live carefully in a small space. Michael, David, Sarah, Lisa, but he'd said siblings. Not my siblings and Marcus and Keisha, just the original 4. The Carter children who'd arrived that November night in 2004, clutching each other and a sin-stuffed elephant, and the kind of terror that only comes from losing everything twice before you're old enough to drive. Denise's mind raced through possibilities as she stood frozen by her door. Why were they here together? Why today? Why had Michael introduced himself formally? like she might not remember the boy who'd run away 3 times before learning to trust that her love wouldn't disappear. Through the door, she could hear whispered conversations, urgent, excited, the kind of low voices that carry big news. She could hear Lisa's laugh, the sound that had taken months to return after the fire, now rich and full and unmistakably happy. She could hear David humming under his breath, a habit he developed during his teenage years when he was working through complex emotions. When she finally opened the door, the sight of them took her breath away completely. These weren't the children who'd left her apartment years ago to pursue their individual dreams. These weren't even the successful adults who called her monthly and sent photos of their achievements. These were 4 people who'd clearly been planning something together, something that had brought them back to her door with excitement radiating from their faces like heat from a fire. Michael stepped forward first, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the hallway where he'd once played with action figures on worn carpet. But his eyes, those eyes that had seen too much too young and learned to trust again in her living room, those eyes were bright with something that looked almost like mischief. "Mama D," he said, dropping the formal tone, "we need to talk." David spoke next, his voice carrying the same melody that had made his music career possible. "We've been busy, all of us, for the past few years. Busier than you know." Sarah stepped closer, her veterinarian's gentle confidence evident in every movement. "Remember when you used to tell us that love wasn't about having enough? It was about giving everything you have?" Lisa pulled out her notebook, but not to write. Instead, she pulled out a photograph, old, slightly faded, taken in their crowded living room during Christmas 2010. 7 people squeezed onto a couch meant for 3, arms wrapped around each other. Faces glow with the kind of happiness that comes from surviving something together and realizing you're not just surviving anymore, you're thriving. "We've been carrying this picture with us," Lisa said softly. "All of us. In our wallets, our offices, our homes. Because no matter how successful we became individually, we never forgot where that success started." Michael reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Thick, official-looking, the kind that carried news too important for phone calls or emails. "Mama D, you taught us that family takes care of family. You showed us that love isn't about what you get. It's about what you give. And you gave us everything for 12 years without ever asking for anything in return." David nodded. "But here's what you didn't know. We've been giving back. All of us. For years." "Not just to you," Sarah added quickly, seeing the protest forming on Denise's lips. "To others. To families like ours was. To children who needed what we needed." Lisa opened her notebook again, this time revealing pages of notes, phone numbers, documentation of something larger than Denise could have imagined. "We started small," Lisa explained. Michael was volunteering with Habitat for Humanity, but then he started specifically working on homes for foster families. David was performing at churches, but then he started donating proceeds to organizations that keep sibling groups together. Sarah was treating animals, but then she started working with therapy animals for traumatized children. "And we realized," Michael continued, "that everything we were doing, everything that mattered to us, could be traced back to lessons you taught us in that cramped apartment where love was the only resource we had in abundance." Marcus's voice came from behind them, and Denise's heart nearly stopped. Marcus was supposed to be at work in Chicago. Marcus hadn't told her he was coming. "So we decided to stop working separately," Marcus said, stepping into view with baby Denise Marie in his arms and Jennifer beside him. Both of them glowed with the kind of excitement that comes from being part of something bigger than yourself. Keisha appeared next, still in her hospital scrubs, her face radiant with the same mysterious joy that seemed to be radiating from all of them. "We decided to work together," Keisha said, "all of us, on something that honors what you taught us and helps other families like ours was." Michael held up the envelope, and Denise noticed his hands were shaking slightly, not with nervousness, but with barely contained excitement. "Mama D, we need you to sit down." "I'm fine standing," Denise said, though her legs suddenly felt unsteady. "Please," David said gently, "trust us one more time." Denise sat at her kitchen table, the same table where they'd shared thousands of meals and solved countless problems, and learned that love could multiply without being divided. Her 6 children, because they would always be her children, no matter how successful or independent they became, arranged themselves around her like they had so many times before. But this time, instead of bringing her their problems, they were bringing her something else entirely. "Open it," Lisa whispered. Inside the envelope were legal documents, lots of them, incorporation papers, tax forms, architectural plans, financial statements. Official-looking papers with letterheads and seals, and a kind of language that meant something important was happening. At the top of the first page, in bold letters that seemed to jump off the paper, the Denise Washington Foundation for Family Preservation. Denise stared at the words until they blurred, until she had to blink hard to bring them back into focus. Her name, on official documents, connected to words like foundation and preservation, and numbers that didn't make sense because they had too many zeros. "What is this?" she whispered. Sarah leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "It's what happens when 6 people who learn about love from an expert decide to teach the world what they learned." David's smile was radiant. "It's what happens when successful people remember that success is meaningless unless you use it to help others succeed." Marcus shifted baby Denise Marie to one arm and reached across the table to take his mother's hand. "It's what happens when children grow up and realize that the best way to honor their mother isn't to be independent. It's to be interdependent. Together. Still." Keisha pulled out another folder, this one filled with photographs and testimonials and documentation of something that had been growing for years without Denise's knowledge. "We've been working on this for 3 years, Keisha explained. All of us in different ways, but with the same goal, creating something that would help other families like ours stay together." Lisa opened her notebook to pages covered with plans, ideas, dreams written in her careful journalist handwriting. Michael uses his engineering skills to design affordable housing for large foster families. David performs at fundraising events and donates proceeds. Sarah provides veterinary services for families who can't afford pet care but won't give up their animals. Marcus handles the financial planning and business development. Keisha trains medical volunteers to work with traumatized children. And I document everything. The families we help, the children who get to stay together, the stories that need to be told. Michael leaned back in his chair, and for a moment he looked exactly like the 14-year-old boy who'd once protected his siblings with fierce determination, now grown into a man who could protect entire communities. "But we were missing something crucial," he said. "We were missing the heart of the operation. We were missing the person who taught us everything we know about making impossible things possible." David nodded. "We were missing our Mama D." Sarah placed another document in front of Denise. A job offer. Executive Director of the Denise Washington Foundation. Salary. More than she'd made in the best year of her life. Benefits. Comprehensive health care, retirement planning, paid time off. Responsibilities. Overseeing programs that would help hundreds of families like theirs stay together. "We don't want you to work for us," Sarah explained. "We want to work for you." Again. "But this time, instead of you taking care of us, we all take care of each other while taking care of families who need what we needed." Keisha pulled out the final surprise. Architectural plans for a building. Large, beautiful, designed with the kind of attention to detail that spoke of people who understood exactly what families in crisis needed. "We bought the building," Keisha said simply. "The old community center on MLK Boulevard. We're renovating it into headquarters for the foundation, but also into temporary housing for large sibling groups who need a place to stay together while permanent placements are arranged." Lisa couldn't contain her excitement any longer. "Mama D, we're going to build the kind of place we needed when we were kids. Emergency housing that keeps families together. Support services that help single parents navigate the system. Educational programs that teach other adults how to do what you did for us." Marcus smiled, the same smile he'd worn as a teenager when he'd figured out a particularly difficult math problem. "And we want you to run it all. Not because we need you to take care of us anymore, but because the world needs you to teach other people how to take care of each other." Michael stood up, the successful engineer who'd learned everything about building strong foundations from watching a woman build a family with nothing but love and determination. "Mama D, you spent 12 years investing in our futures. Now we want to spend the rest of our lives investing in yours, not as your children who owe you a debt, but as your partners who want to change the world using the blueprint you gave us. David's voice was gentle, musical even in speech. The question isn't whether you're qualified to run a foundation that helps families. The question is whether the foundation is worthy of being run by the woman who single-handedly proved that love can overcome any obstacle. Sarah nodded. You didn't just raise us, Mama D. You raised us to understand that success is meaningless unless it serves love. Now we want to help you build something that serves love on a scale that matches the size of your heart. Denise looked around the table at these 6 extraordinary adults who'd somehow managed to surprise her completely while staying exactly true to the values she'd taught them. She looked at the documents that represented more money than she'd ever seen, more opportunity than she'd ever imagined, more recognition than she'd ever sought. But most importantly, she looked at their faces that glowed with excitement not about their individual achievements, but about the chance to work together again, to be family again, to take everything they learned about love and multiply it beyond the boundaries of their small apartment. I don't understand, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. How? How did you manage to all of this without me knowing? Lisa grinned, the same mischievous expression she'd worn as a child when she was about to reveal a secret that would make everyone happy. Mama D, you taught us how to plan surprises. Remember Marcus's 16th birthday when we all saved our allowances for 3 months to buy him that graphing calculator he needed for school? Remember Christmas 2012 when we all made you presents because we didn't have money to buy anything, but we wanted you to know how much we loved you? David added. Sarah laughed. Remember when you were working those double shifts and we all learned to cook dinner so you'd have a hot meal waiting when you got home? Even though David burned everything and Lisa put salt in the brownies instead of sugar? This is just bigger, Marcus said, his engineering mind clearly satisfied with the elegance of their solution. Instead of surprising you with homemade gifts, we're surprising you with a chance to change the world. Michael reached across the table and took both of Denise's hands in his. His hands were soft now, the hands of someone who worked with ideas instead of tools, but they were strong in the way that mattered most. Strong enough to hold up dreams, strong enough to build futures, strong enough to give back to the woman who'd given him everything. Mama D, you spent your whole adult life making sure other people could succeed. You worked 3 jobs, sacrificed your own dreams, given up your own comfort so that 6 children could have futures that seemed impossible when we first showed up at your door. David leaned forward. But what you didn't realize is that while you were teaching us to succeed, you were also teaching us that success without purpose is just expensive loneliness. Every achievement we've earned has felt incomplete because we weren't sharing it with a woman who made it possible. Sarah's voice was soft but intense. We've all been successful individually, but we've never been successful as a family. We've never had the chance to work together towards something that mattered more than our separate careers. Lisa opened her notebook to a page covered with photographs. Pictures of families the foundation had already helped in preliminary programs. Children who were staying together because of services funded by money Michael, David, Sarah, Marcus, Keisha, and Lisa had been quietly contributing for years. This isn't theoretical, Mama D. We've already started helping families. Michael's been designing affordable housing modifications for large foster families for 2 years. David's been funding emergency assistance programs through his concert proceeds. Sarah's been providing free veterinary care for pets belonging to families in crisis because she learned that sometimes people won't leave dangerous situations if it means abandoning animals they love. Keisha pulled out her phone and showed Denise a video. Children play in a yard behind a house that looked suspiciously well-designed, suspiciously safe, suspiciously like the kind of place where love could take root and grow. We've helped 12 families stay together in the past 2 years, Keisha said. 43 children who didn't have to be separated from their siblings because of housing issues or financial crises. 43 children who got to experience what we experienced, being loved completely, being fought for daily, being part of something that refused to give up on them. Marcus smiled, holding his daughter who would grow up knowing that her family's wealth came not from luck or inheritance, but from a grandmother's love that had multiplied across generations. But the most important part, Marcus said, is that we want to do this together. not as your children who owe you a debt, but as your partners who share your vision. We want to build something that honors what you taught us by teaching it to the world. David's voice carried a melody of hope that had made his music resonate with thousands of listeners. We want to prove that what happened in this apartment wasn't a miracle. It was a method, and that method can be replicated, scaled, shared with other families who need to learn that love really can overcome any obstacle. Lisa looked directly into Denise's eyes, her journalist training evident in the way she delivered the most important truth of all. Mama D, you've been mourning the end of your story, but we're here to tell you that your story isn't ending. It's about to become the beginning of something bigger than any of us imagined. You didn't just raise 6 children. You raised 6 people who understand that love is the most powerful force in the universe, and now we want to help you prove it to everyone else. Sarah stood up and walked around the table to embrace the woman who'd taught her that wounded things could be healed with patience and consistency and unconditional love. The foundation is real, Mama D. The funding is real. The building is real. The families we're going to help are real. The only question is, are you ready to be Mama D to the whole world? Denise looked around the table at 6 faces she'd loved longer and deeper than she'd ever loved anything in her life. 6 people who'd taken everything she'd given them and transformed it into something that could help hundreds of other families. 6 adults who'd succeeded so completely that they'd found their way back to the source of their success, not to rest in it, but to share it. The black SUV outside wasn't just transportation. It was a symbol of how far they'd traveled from the night they'd arrived with nothing but trauma and each other. And now they were using that same vehicle to bring her an invitation to travel even farther, toward a future where her love could reach children she'd never met, but who needed exactly what she'd given them. But before she could answer, before she could process the magnitude of what they were offering, Michael had one more revelation that would change everything she thought she understood about the story they'd lived together. There's something else, Mama D. Something we haven't told you yet about why we're all here today, why this couldn't wait for phone calls or planned visits. The reason we're here isn't just about the foundation. It's about the family that's waiting to meet you. The family that's waiting to meet you. Those words hung in the air like a question mark, like a promise, like the beginning of a revelation that would redefine everything Denise thought she knew about the impact of 12 years spent loving children who needed everything she had to give. Because what she was about to learn was that love doesn't just change the people you give it to directly. Love changes everyone those people touch, and everyone those people touch, creating ripples that become waves that become tsunamis of transformation that can reach farther than the original giver ever dreamed possible. What she was about to discover was that the black SUV wasn't just carrying her 6 children back to her door. It was carrying the proof that her love had been growing and multiplying for years in ways she never could have imagined. But that revelation, the one that would show Denise the true scope of what she'd accomplished and the real reason all 6 of her children had returned to her door on the same day, that revelation was still coming, and it was bigger than anything she could have prepared for. The family that's waiting to meet you. Those words echoed in Denise's mind as she stared at the foundation documents, at her own name printed in official letterhead, at the faces of 6 people who'd somehow managed to orchestrate the impossible while she'd been mourning the end of their story. "What family?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Michael exchanged glances with his siblings, a silent communication perfected over years of protecting each other and planning surprises that mattered. "Mama D, do you remember what you used to tell us when we were scared about the future? When we worried that we weren't good enough or smart enough or strong enough to make in the world? I told you that love grows." Denise said automatically, the words as familiar as breathing, that when you love someone completely, it doesn't make you smaller. It makes your heart bigger, so you have more love to give to others. David smiled, his musician soul recognizing the melody of truth in her words. "Exactly. And what you didn't realize is that we were listening. All of us. Every day for 12 years. Sarah walked to the window, her movement casual but purposeful. "Mama D, do you see that line of cars outside your building?" Denise turned to look, and her breath caught in her throat. The black SUV was no longer alone. There were other vehicles, a minivan, several sedans, cars that spoke of families, of people who traveled distances to be here for something important. "Who?" Denise started to ask, but the question died in her throat as she saw people emerging from the vehicles. Adults, children, teenagers. Too many to count quickly, all moving toward her building with the same purposeful energy her 6 children had carried when they'd arrived. Lisa closed her notebook and took Denise's hands, her journalist training evident in how she organized the revelation she was about to deliver. Mama D, remember the Christmas when you told us that family isn't just about blood or papers or official titles. You said family is about choosing to love people, especially when it's hard, especially when it costs everything you have. Keisha moved to stand behind Denise's chair, her nurse's hands gentle on her shoulders. You taught us that lesson so well that we couldn't help but live it. Every single one of us has been creating family wherever we go. Not because we plan to, but because it's how you taught us to move through the world. Marcus shifted baby Denise Marie so his mother could see her granddaughter's face clearly. This little girl is going to grow up in a world where love multiplies instead of divides because of what you taught us. But she's not going to be the only one. The footsteps in the hallway were getting louder, more numerous. Voices, adult voices, children's voices, the sound of multiple families converging on a single destination. Michael, Denise said, her heart racing, "What's happening? Who are all these people?" Michael's smile was radiant with the kind of joy that comes from keeping a secret so beautiful that revealing it feels like giving the perfect gift. They're the families we've helped over the past 3 years. They're the children who got to stay with their siblings because of housing modifications I designed. They're the kids who maintained their emotional support animals during family crises because of Sarah's free veterinary care. They're the families who kept their homes because of emergency financial assistance funded by David's concerts and Lisa's freelance work and Keisha's volunteer nursing. David stepped toward the door, his hand on the handle. They're the people who experienced what we experienced, being loved completely by someone who chose to fight for them when everyone else was ready to give up. The knocking came, not the 3 deliberate raps of Michael's arrival, but a symphony of knocks that spoke of multiple hands, multiple families, multiple stories of love that had grown from the seeds planted in this very apartment. Sarah opened the door, and Denise's world exploded with color and sound and life. They came through her door like a parade of miracles. Family after family whose lives had been touched by the love that had grown from Denise's original choice to take in 4 frightened children. First came the Morrison family, a single mother with 3 children who'd been about to be separated until Michael's housing modification program helped them find an affordable place large enough for all of them to stay together. 8-year-old Tyler Morrison ran straight to Denise with a card he'd made himself. "Ms. Denise," he called out, using the name all the children in the Foundation's programs had learned to associate with safety and family preservation. "I drew you a picture of our family. Mr. Michael said he liked family pictures." Behind the Morrisons came the Rodriguez family, grandparents who'd been caring for 4 grandchildren until health issues threatened their ability to keep them. Sarah's connection with therapy animals had led to a service dog program that allowed the grandfather to maintain independence while caring for the children safely. "Senora Denise," the grandmother said in accented English, tears streaming down her face. "My nietos, they stay with us because of your children. Your children, they teach us that family es más importante than anything." The Chun family followed, parents who'd been struggling to afford medical care for their special needs daughter until Keisha's volunteer network connected them with resources that kept their family intact and their daughter healthy. "Ms. Washington," Dr. Chin said formally, then switched to a warmer tone, "Denise, our daughter Lucy is thriving because your daughter Keisha taught us that love and medicine work best when they work together." More families kept coming. The Johnsons, whose teenager had been headed for juvenile detention until David's mentorship program gave him an outlet for his anger through music. The Williams family, whose story of resilience had been featured in one of Lisa's articles, leading to community support that kept them together through a financial crisis. Each family carried the same message. The love Denise had poured into 6 children had grown and multiplied, reaching families she'd never met, children she'd never held, parents she'd never counseled. Her love had become a force of nature, touching lives in ways she'd never imagined. But the procession wasn't finished. Marcus stepped forward. Baby Denise Marie reaching toward her grandmother with the absolute trust that only babies possess. Mama D, there's something else. Someone else. Through the crowd of families still flowing into her small apartment, through the chaos of children showing her pictures and adults trying to express gratitude that was too big for words, Denise saw someone moving against the flow. An elderly woman, elegantly dressed, moving with the kind of careful dignity that spoke of someone who'd lived through her own share of struggles and triumphs. She was carrying flowers, not store-bought arrangements, but garden flowers clearly picked with care and wrapped in simple paper. The woman approached Denise with tears in her eyes and a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. "Ms. Washington," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who was used to being heard. "My name is Eleanor Carter. I believe you knew my grandchildren." Music stops abruptly. Complete silence except for distant murmur of families. Eleanor Carter. The name hit Denise like a physical blow. The children's grandmother. The one who died in 2004. The one whose death had led to 4 children being passed between relatives until they ended up in the system that had brought them to Denise's door. But this woman was clearly alive, clearly healthy, clearly here with purpose that Denise couldn't begin to understand. I don't understand," Denise stammered. "The children said, they told me you had passed away." Eleanor's smile was gentle, understanding, tinged with the kind of sadness that comes from years of regret. "I did pass away in a sense. I passed away from their lives because I was too proud, too stubborn, too afraid of failing them the way their parents had failed them." She moved closer, and Denise could see the family resemblance. Michael's cheekbones, David's eyes, Sarah's gentle demeanor, Lisa's intelligent curiosity. "When my son and daughter-in-law died in that fire," Eleanor continued, "I was overwhelmed. For traumatized children, and I was a 70-year-old woman who'd raised my own children 40 years earlier. I was afraid I couldn't give them what they needed. I was afraid I'd fail them when they'd already lost so much. So I told the social workers I was too sick to care for them. I let them believe I was dying because it seemed kinder than admitting I was just scared. Scared of not being enough for children who'd already been failed by so many adults." The confession hung in the air like smoke, heavy with the weight of 20 years of regret and the recognition of a choice that had changed everything. "I've been following their lives from a distance," Eleanor continued, her voice stronger now. "I've watched them grow up through social media, through news articles about David's music career, through professional publications about Sarah's veterinary work. I've watched them become extraordinary adults, and I've spent 20 years wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to try." Denise felt the room spinning slightly. 20 years of believing she'd been these children's only option, 20 years of carrying the weight of being their sole source of stability, and now learning that there had been family, blood family, who'd chosen not to step forward. Then last month, Eleanor continued, "Michael contacted me. He'd been looking for me for years, not because he was angry, but because he wanted me to meet the woman who'd done what I was too afraid to do." Lisa pulled out another folder, this one filled with letters, photos, documentation of something that had been building for months without Denise's knowledge. "Mama D," Lisa said gently, "we found our biological grandmother 3 years ago. We've been building a relationship with her, learning about our parents, understanding our family history. But most importantly, we've been telling her about you." David's voice carried wonder, as if he still couldn't quite believe what he was about to reveal. "She's been funding the foundation, Mama D, the startup money, the building purchase, the programs we've been running. It's been coming from our grandmother, who wanted to honor the woman who did what she couldn't." Eleanor stepped closer to Denise, her eyes bright with tears and something that looked like liberation. "Ms. Washington, Denise, I've spent 20 years living with the knowledge that I failed my grandchildren when they needed me most. I've spent 20 years knowing that someone else was loving them the way I should have loved them. I've spent 20 years wondering if I could ever make amends for choosing fear over love." She reached into her purse and pulled out a check. Another check, this one with more zeros than the previous ones combined. "I can't give them back their childhood," Eleanor said, her voice breaking slightly. "I can't undo the trauma of thinking they were completely alone in the world. But I can make sure that the woman who loved them when I couldn't is everything she needs to keep loving children who need what they needed. Michael moved to stand beside his biological grandmother, this reunion of past and present and future all converging in Denise's small apartment. Mama D, our grandmother wants to be part of the foundation. She wants to work alongside you to make sure that other grandparents don't make the choice she made. She wants to help other families understand that love is bigger than fear, that trying and failing is better than not trying at all. Sarah nodded enthusiastically. She's been studying family preservation programs for 3 years, learning everything she can about what works and what doesn't. She's become an expert in grandparent rights and kinship care, all because she wanted to honor what you taught us. Eleanor looked directly into Denise's eyes, and in that gaze was 20 years of regret transformed into purpose, 20 years of wondering converted into action. Denise, I made the worst mistake of my life when I let fear convince me I wasn't enough for those children. But you prove that love is always enough when it's given completely. I want to spend whatever years I have left helping you teach that lesson to other families. David stepped forward, his musician sensitivity to emotional crescendos evident in his timing. Mama D, our grandmother has been funding emergency placement programs that keep sibling groups together. In the past year alone, she prevented 47 families from being separated. But Eleanor Carter wasn't the only surprise waiting in Denise's living room. Keisha gestured toward the crowd of families still filling the small space, their faces glowing with gratitude and excitement. All of these families are connected, Mama D, not just because we helped them, but because they've been helping each other. Lisa opened her notebook to pages filled with contact information, connection maps, documentation of something that looked like a vast network of mutual support. The Morrison family is mentoring the Rodriguez family through grandparent custody issues. The Chun family is providing translation services for immigrant families navigating the foster care system. The Johnson family's teenager is teaching music to younger kids in emergency placement. Marcus grinned, his engineer's mind clearly delighted with the elegant design of what they created. It turns out that when you help families by treating them like family, they start treating each other like family too. The love multiplies exponentially. Eleanor moved closer to Denise, her voice dropping to something more intimate despite the crowd surrounding them. Denise, these families call themselves Mama D's Army because they've learned that the woman who saved my grandchildren has been saving family for years through her children's work. They wanted to meet you, to thank you, to show you that your love didn't just change 6 lives. It changed dozens, hundreds of lives that have been touched by the people you raised. 8-year-old Tyler Morrison tugged on Denise's sleeve, his artwork still clutched in his small hands. Ms. Denise, Mr. Michael said you taught him that family means never giving up on people. He taught my mom that when she wanted to give up on keeping us together. Now my mom teaches other moms the same thing. A teenager from the Johnson family stepped forward, guitar in hand. Ms. Washington, David wrote a song about you called The Woman Who Multiplies Love. He taught it to me, and now I play for other kids in group homes, so they know that families like yours exist. Dr. Sarah Chun, the veterinarian Denise's Sarah had trained in therapy animal techniques, approached with a small girl clinging to her hand. Ms. Washington, this is my daughter Lily. She has autism and was having severe anxiety until we got her a therapy dog through your daughter's program. Sarah taught us that healing happens when love has 4 legs and doesn't judge. Lily wanted to meet the woman who taught Sarah how to love completely. The testimonials kept coming, each one revealing another way that Denise's love had traveled through time and space and circumstance to reach families she'd never met. A grandfather who'd gained confidence to raise his orphan grandchildren after attending one of Michael's workshops on creating stable homes for large families. A mother who'd kept her special needs child at home instead of placing him in residential care after learning about support networks through Keisha's hospital connections. A father who'd reconciled with his own children after being inspired by David's music about forgiveness and second chances. A family who'd stayed together through financial crisis after receiving emergency assistance funded by Lisa's article-generated donations. But the most powerful testimony came from someone unexpected. A young woman, maybe 25, carrying a toddler and looking at Denise with eyes that held a familiar combination of strength and vulnerability. Ms. Washington, she said, her voice clear despite her tears. "My name is Angela. You don't know me, but you saved my life anyway. I was in the foster care system 15 years ago, about to age out with nowhere to go, when I met Michael at a community college engineering event. He was there recruiting students for scholarship programs. But when he heard my story, he didn't just offer me a scholarship. He offered me what you taught him to offer: family." Angela shifted her toddler to her other hip, and Denise could see the child's features clearly. Mixed race, beautiful, with eyes that sparkle with curiosity and confidence. Michael and David and Sarah and Marcus and Keisha and Lisa, they didn't just help me get through school. They became my family. They taught me what you taught them. That family isn't about where you come from. It's about who refuses to let you face the world alone. "This is my son, James," Angela continued, looking down at the toddler who was reaching toward Denise with the fearless friendliness of a child who'd only known love. "He exists because your children taught me I was worthy of love, worthy of building a family, worthy of breaking cycles instead of repeating them." Eleanor Carter stepped forward again, her voice carrying the authority of someone making an official announcement. "Denise, there are 43 families here today. Families that exist because of work funded by your children, guided by principles you taught them, inspired by an example you set 20 years ago when you chose love over logic. But that's not all. There are hundreds more who couldn't make the trip. Families in Nashville who know David's story because he tells it before every concert. Families in Ann Arbor who bring their pets to Sarah's clinic because they know she understands what it means to be rescued. Families across the Midwest who've read Lisa's articles and found hope in stories that prove love can overcome any obstacle. Michael pulled out one final document, a thick binder filled with photographs, letters, testimonials from families whose names Denise had never heard, but whose lives had been changed by the ripple effects of her love. "Mama D," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you worried that your story was ending when we grew up and left. But your story wasn't ending. It was multiplying. Every family we've helped has learned to help other families. Every child who got to stay with their siblings grows up understanding that family is worth fighting for. Every parent who receives support has become someone who supports others." David opened his guitar case and pulled out the instrument that had carried him from their living room to stages across the country. "There's a song I wrote about you that I've never played for you. It's called The Mathematics of Love. And it's about what happens when one person's love becomes a foundation for an entire community's understanding of what family can be." He began to sing, his voice carrying the same hope and strength that had sustained him through their hardest years. "She fed us when she had no food to spare. She loved us when she had no love to share. But love don't follow rules of mathematics. Love grows bigger when you give it away." One by one, the families in the room began humming along, some knowing the words, others just adding their voices to a melody that had become an anthem for the community of love they'd all become part of. As the song ended, as the voices faded to whispered conversations and children playing quietly in corners they claimed, Denise found herself looking around her small apartment that had somehow expanded to hold more love than she'd ever imagined possible. 43 families. Hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by love that started with her choice to take in 4 children she couldn't afford to feed. Love that had grown through Michael's engineering skills and David's music and Sarah's healing touch and Marcus's business acumen and Keisha's medical expertise and Lisa's storytelling gift. Eleanor Carter approached her again, moving slowly through the crowd of families who were sharing stories and contact information and planning future gatherings. "Denise," she said quietly, "I need you to understand something. When I made the choice to let my grandchildren go into the system, I thought I was protecting them from my inadequacy. I thought someone else, someone with more energy, more resources, more capability, would give them what I couldn't. I never imagined that someone else would be a woman who had even less than I did, but who had something I'd forgotten I possessed. The willingness to try, even when trying seemed impossible." Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph, old, creased from years of handling, showing 4 children who looked exactly like the children who'd knocked on Denise's door in 2004. "This is the last picture I have of them before their parents died. Look at their faces. You can see the joy, the security, the confidence that comes from being completely loved." She pulled out another photograph, This one recent, showing Michael, David, Sarah, and Lisa as adults, successful, confident, radiating the kind of inner strength that only comes from having survived trauma and emerged stronger. And this is them now. Look at their faces again. That same joy, that same security, that same confidence. You didn't just keep them alive, Denise. You kept their spirits alive. You made sure that the children they were before the trauma could grow into the adults they were meant to be. Michael stepped forward to stand beside his grandmother, his arm around her shoulders in a gesture that spoke of forgiveness and new beginnings. Mama D, we asked our grandmother to be part of the foundation, not just because she wants to fund it, but because she represents something important. It's never too late to choose love over fear. She made a mistake 20 years ago, but she's spending the rest of her life making sure other grandparents don't make the same mistake. David nodded. And you represent something equally important. That love doesn't require perfect circumstances or abundant resources. Love just requires someone willing to give everything they have, even when everything they have doesn't seem like enough. Sarah moved to the crowd to stand with her family, biological and chosen, past and present, all connected by threads of love that have been woven over decades of choices made in favor of connection over convenience. Together, Sarah said, you and our grandmother represent the full spectrum of family love. The love that acts immediately when children need rescue, and the love that acts eventually when adults are ready to heal. The foundation needs both. Marcus bounced his daughter gently, this granddaughter named for the woman who taught him that family names carried honor and responsibility in equal measure. The building is ready, Mama D. The programs are designed. The funding is secured. The families are waiting. The only thing missing is a woman who taught us all what love looks like when it refuses to give up. Keisha, the nurse who'd learned to fight for the most vulnerable patients because she'd watched Denise fight for the most vulnerable children, stepped forward with a contract that would make it all official. The question isn't whether you're qualified to run a foundation that helps families, Keisha said, echoing Michael's earlier words. The question is whether we're qualified to work alongside the woman who single-handedly proved that love can overcome any obstacle. Lisa, the writer who'd found her voice in this apartment and used it to tell stories that mattered, held up her notebook one final time. I've been documenting everything, Mama D, every family we've helped, every child who got to stay with their siblings, every parent who learned that they were stronger than they knew, and every single story starts the same way. Was someone who learned about love from the woman who took in 6 children when she barely had enough for herself. Tyler Morrison, the 8-year-old who'd drawn the family picture, tugged on Denise's sleeve again. Ms. Denise, are you going to help more kids like us? Are you going to be their Mama D too? And in that innocent question, Denise heard the answer to every doubt she carried for the past 5 years. The children hadn't outgrown their need for her. They'd grown into their ability to help her reach more children. The love hadn't ended when they became independent. It had become bigger, stronger, more powerful than anything she could have accomplished alone. Looking around her apartment filled with families who existed because love had multiplied beyond her wildest dreams. Looking at 6 adults who'd used their success to create more success for others. Looking at a grandmother who'd found the courage to choose love over fear after 20 years of regret. Denise Washington understood something that would change everything. Her story hadn't ended when her children grew up. Her story had just been waiting for her to realize that love doesn't retire. It just finds new ways to expand. The woman who'd once worried about feeding 6 children was being invited to help feed the hunger for family that existed in communities across the country. The woman who'd once stretched love to cover more people than seemed possible was being asked to teach the world that love has no limits when it's given without reservation. Yes, Denise said, her voice clear and strong for the first time in years. Yes, I'll help more families. Yes, I'll run the foundation. Yes, I'll work with you, all of you, to make sure that love wins more often than fear. But even as celebration erupted around her, even as 43 families expressed their gratitude and 6 children embraced the woman who taught them everything about love, Denise knew that the real work was just beginning. Because now she understood, the greatest gift you can give someone isn't success or stability or even love itself. The greatest gift you can give someone is the knowledge that they have enough love inside them to change the world one person at a time. And Denise Washington was about to prove that lesson on a scale she'd never imagined possible. The black SUV outside wasn't just the end of one chapter. It was the beginning of the most important chapter of all. The Denise Washington Foundation for Family Preservation opened its doors on March 15th, 2024, exactly 22 years to the day after Jerome's heart attack had changed the trajectory of Denise's life forever. The date wasn't chosen randomly. Michael had calculated deliberately, understanding that some anniversaries deserved to be transformed from markers of loss into celebrations of legacy. The building on MLK Boulevard had been transformed into something that looked like a cross between a community center and a home, which was exactly what Eleanor Carter and the 6 children had envisioned. The architecture spoke of permanence and warmth, with spaces designed for families to gather, children to play safely, and parents to find the support they needed to keep their families intact. Denise's office was on the 2nd floor, with windows that overlooked a playground where children from dozens of families came to play together after school. The walls were covered with photographs, not just of the original 6 children, but of all the families the foundation had helped, all the siblings who'd stayed together, all the parents who'd learned that asking for help was a sign of strength, not weakness. On her desk sat 3 items that told the story of her transformation. The original photograph of 7 people squeezed onto a couch at Christmas 2010, the State Award for Child Advocacy that had recognized her individual work, and a new photo from the Foundation's opening day showing over 200 people gathered to celebrate the official launch of an idea that had started with one woman's refusal to let children be separated. Denise Washington Foundation, this is Mama D speaking. She answered the phone, the title she'd earned in a 2-bedroom apartment now serving as her professional signature. Ms. Washington, this is Carmen Rodriguez from Child Protective Services in Grand Rapids. We have a situation. 5 siblings, ages 4 to 15, need emergency placement together. Everyone we've called says it's impossible, but we heard about your foundation. Nothing's impossible, Denise replied automatically, already reaching for the emergency placement protocols that Michael had designed, the resource network that Sarah had created, the support systems that all 6 children had built together. Tell me about these babies, and let's figure out how to keep them together. This was a conversation Denise had now 3 or 4 times a week. Social workers from across Michigan and beyond calling, because they'd heard about the foundation that specialized in impossible cases, that somehow managed to keep large sibling groups together when traditional placements failed. What they didn't always understand was that the somehow wasn't magic. It was method. The same method Denise had developed over 12 years of making love practical, of turning emotional commitment into logistical solutions, of proving that when you refuse to accept that something can't be done, you often discover new ways to do it. The foundation's success had exceeded even Michael's carefully calculated projections. In 6 months, they prevented the separation of 32 sibling groups. They provided emergency housing for over 100 children. They connected resource-rich families with resource-poor families, creating networks of mutual support that strengthened entire communities. But more than the numbers, more than the statistics that impressed government officials and funding organizations, what mattered was the transformation Denise could see in individual faces. Every day brought new evidence that love really could multiply without being divided. Michael had taken a leave of absence from his engineering job to work full-time on foundation programs, designing modular housing solutions that could be quickly deployed when families needed space for emergency placements. His wife, Jennifer, had joined the effort too, using her background in project management to coordinate services across multiple counties. It's the most challenging work I've ever done, Michael told Denise during one of their weekly planning meetings. But it's also the most meaningful. Every family we help proves that what you did for us wasn't unique. It was replicable. Love is scalable. Mama D. David had restructured his entire music career around foundation fundraising, performing concerts that raised both money and awareness for family preservation. His song, The Mathematics of Love, had become an anthem for social workers, foster families, and anyone who believed that children belong with their siblings when never possible. I've played for audiences of thousands, David said, but the most important audience is always a family sitting in our emergency housing, hearing music that tells them they're not alone, that someone believes they're worth fighting for. Sarah had opened a satellite veterinary clinic right in the foundation building, providing free care for pets belonging to families in crisis. Her understanding that families often included four-legged members had prevented dozens of children from having to choose between keeping their beloved animals and staying in safe housing. Animals heal trauma in ways that humans sometimes can't, Sarah explained to visitors who marveled at the therapy dog program she developed. I learned that from watching how love healed us. Sometimes the medicine you need comes with a wagging tail and unconditional acceptance. Marcus had developed the Foundation's financial literacy programs, teaching parents how to navigate systems, apply for assistance, and build stability even when resources were limited. His background in engineering had given him a systematic approach to problem-solving that served families facing complex challenges. Mama D taught us that poverty isn't a moral failing, it's a mathematical problem. Marcus said during workshops that were always full. And mathematical problems have solutions when you're willing to work together to find them. Keisha had created training programs for medical professionals, teaching them to recognize signs of family stress and connect families with resources before crises became catastrophes. Her work in pediatric nursing had shown her how many medical issues were actually symptoms of family instability. Healthy children need healthy families, Keisha would say during her training sessions. Sometimes the best medicine you can prescribe is help keeping the family together. Lisa had become the Foundation's voice of the world, writing articles and creating media content that changed public perception about foster care, family preservation, and the possibilities that open up when communities committed to keeping children with their siblings. Every story I write now is really a chapter in Mama D's story, Lisa said, because every family we help is proof that her method works, that love combined with practical support can overcome obstacles that seem insurmountable. But perhaps the most beautiful transformation was Eleanor Carter's journey from regret to redemption. At 76, she had become the Foundation's most effective advocate for kinship care, traveling to conferences and training sessions where she shared her story with other grandparents who were struggling with the same fears that had once paralyzed her. I thought I was enough, she'd tell audiences of potential kinship caregivers, her voice strong despite her age. I thought someone else would be better equipped to love my grandchildren. It took me 20 years to learn that love doesn't require perfect circumstances. It just requires willingness to try. Her partnership with Denise had become the Foundation's greatest strength. Eleanor's financial resources, combined with Denise's practical experience, created a model that other organizations were studying and replicating across the country. We complement each other perfectly, Eleanor told a reporter who was writing about intergenerational collaboration in social services. I provide the resources I should have provided 20 years ago, and Denise provides the wisdom she earned by doing what I was too afraid to do. Together, we make sure that other families don't face the choices we once thought were our only options. On a quiet evening in September 2024, almost exactly 1 year after the black SUV had first appeared at her door, Denise sat in her Foundation office reviewing the monthly reports that documented their impact. 217 families served. Over 600 children who'd remained with their siblings when separation had seemed inevitable. Dozens of kinship caregivers who'd found the confidence to step forward for children in their extended families. Multiple government agencies that had changed their policies based on the Foundation's success rates. But the numbers, impressive as they were, couldn't capture the real transformation that had occurred. Working late again? Michael asked, appearing in her doorway with takeout containers and that protective concern that had never quite left him, even as his confidence had grown. Just thinking, Denise replied, gesturing for him to sit in one of the chairs across from her desk. Chairs that were never empty now, always occupied by families seeking help or staff members planning programs or community members volunteering their time and talents. Michael set down the food and studied his mother's face with the careful attention he'd learned during years of watching for signs that the people he loved were struggling. What are you thinking about? I'm thinking about time, Denise said, about how 20 years ago, I thought my story was about one woman taking care of 6 children. Then 10 years ago, I thought it was about 6 children who'd grown beyond needing that woman. But now, she gestured toward the window, where the playground was lit by security lights that showed families from afternoon programs still gathering, still connecting, still learning from each other. Now I understand that it was never about me and 6 children. It was about love creating more love, about family creating more family, about one choice to say yes to children who needed help creating a community where yes became a default answer instead of the exception. Michael smiled, and for a moment, he looked exactly like the 14-year-old boy who'd once asked her why she was willing to fight for children who weren't hers. Mama D, do you remember what you told me that first night when I asked you why you were keeping us? You said love isn't about having enough. It's about giving everything you have. I remember. Well, you gave us everything you had, and we used it to build lives that could give everything we have to others. And those others are using what we give them to help even more people. Your love didn't just change 6 lives. It started a chain reaction that's still spreading. David appeared in the doorway, guitar case in hand as always, fresh from a foundation fundraising concert. The most beautiful part, he said, settling into another chair, is that it's not stopping. Every family we help learns to help other families. Every child who gets to stay with their siblings grows up understanding that family is worth fighting for. Sarah followed, tired from a day of providing veterinary care, but energized by a purpose that went beyond individual treatment. It's like you planted a garden 20 years ago, and now we're all gardeners helping it spread to places you never imagined it could grow. One by one, they gathered in her office as they'd once gathered around her kitchen table. Marcus with baby Denise Marie, Keisha fresh from hospital shifts, Lisa with notebooks full of new stories about families whose lives were being transformed. And for the first time in years, Denise felt a particular kind of fullness that comes from being surrounded by people who need you not for survival, but for a purpose. Not because they can't manage without you, but because they don't want to manage without you. The foundation is just the beginning, Lisa said, her journalist instincts already sensing the bigger story that was still unfolding. The real impact is going to be measured in generations, in children who grow up understanding that family can be chosen, that love can overcome any obstacle, that one person's commitment to saying yes can change hundreds of lives. Keisha looked around the office that had become their new family meeting place, walls covered with evidence of love multiplied beyond measure. Mama D, you used to worry that we'd forgotten where we came from, that success would make us forget the lessons you taught us. But the truth is, everything we've accomplished has been our way of showing the world what you showed us. That love is the most powerful force in the universe when someone has the courage to use it completely. Eleanor Carter appeared in the doorway, moving slowly but with purpose, carrying a tray of coffee and the kind of grandmother authority that had emerged as she'd learned to step into roles she'd abdicated 20 years earlier. Denise, she said, settling into the last empty chair. I've been thinking about legacy, about what we leave behind when our time here is finished. Some people leave behind money. Some leave behind achievements. Some leave behind their names on buildings or awards. But you're leaving behind an understanding of love that will outlive all of us. Every family we help will teach their children what they learn from us. Every child who gets to stay with their siblings will grow up knowing that family is sacred. Every parent who receives support will become someone who supports others. Eleanor's voice grew stronger, carrying conviction earned through years of witnessing the ripple effects of Denise's original choice. You're not just changing lives, Denise. You're changing the definition of what's possible when someone refuses to accept that love has limits. Baby Denise Marie chose that moment to reach for her grandmother, tiny fingers grasping at the woman whose name she carried and whose legacy she would inherit. As Denise held her granddaughter, she could see the future stretching ahead, a future where this little girl would grow up in a world where families like theirs were supported rather than separated, where love was seen as a practical solution rather than a naive sentiment. You know what the most beautiful part is? Michael said, watching his mother hold his daughter with the same gentle strength that had once comforted him when he was afraid the world had no place for broken children. The most beautiful part is that this little girl will never know a world where sibling groups are routinely separated. She'll grow up thinking that communities naturally support families in crisis, that successful people automatically use their success to help others succeed, that love multiplying is just how the world works. David strummed a gentle chord on a guitar. She'll grow up thinking that having a foundation named after your grandmother is normal, that using your talents to help families is just what people do. Sarah laughed, the sound carrying the same gentleness that had made wounded animals trust her from the very beginning. She'll think every veterinarian provides free care for families in crisis, because that's all she'll have ever known. Marcus, the engineer who'd learned to build solutions from watching his mother engineer miracles daily, smiled at his daughter. She'll grow up in a world where impossible isn't an acceptable answer when families need help. Keisha, the nurse who'd learned to fight for vulnerable patients by watching Denise fight for vulnerable children, touched her niece's tiny hand. She'll think every hospital has programs to keep families together during medical crises, because we're making sure that becomes reality. Lisa, the writer whose voice had been restored in this family and was now amplifying her message to the world, looked up from her notebook where she'd been documenting every moment of this reunion. She'll grow up reading stories about families who overcome impossible odds, and she'll think those stories are normal instead of exceptional, because love like yours is going to become the standard instead of the exception. Eleanor Carter stood up slowly, her movement commanding attention the way it had in boardrooms and family gatherings for decades. At 76, she'd learned to speak with the authority of someone who'd made terrible mistakes and found ways to transform them into wisdom. "I want to say something to anyone who might be listening to this story," she said, looking directly at Denise, but speaking to an invisible audience that stretched far beyond the walls of the Foundation office. 20 years ago, I made a choice based on fear. I told myself I wasn't enough, wasn't capable, wasn't equipped to love for traumatized children the way they deserved to be loved. I convinced myself that someone else would be better for them. I was wrong about everything except one thing. Someone else was better for them, but not because they had more money or more space or more resources. They were better because they were willing to try when I wasn't. They were better because they chose love over comfort, family over convenience, possibility over fear. Eleanor moved to stand beside Denise. Two women separated by 20 years of different choices, but united by their love for the same children. The moral of the story isn't that you need to be perfect to love children. The moral is that you need to be willing. Willing to try when trying seems impossible. Willing to give when you don't have enough. Willing to believe that love really can overcome any obstacle when someone has the courage to prove it. David set down his guitar and spoke with a voice that had carried hope to audiences across the country. But there's another moral too. Success without connection is just expensive loneliness. We all learned that during the years when we were achieving our individual goals, but missing the family that had made those goals possible. Sarah nodded. The real success isn't becoming independent from the people who love you. The real success is becoming so strong that you can choose interdependence, choosing to stay connected, choosing to work together, choosing to use your individual strengths to support collective goals. Michael looked around the office that had become their new family meeting place, where they gathered weekly to plan programs and support families and continue the work that had brought meaning to all their separate successes. Mama D taught us that family isn't about DNA or legal documents or perfect circumstances. Family is about choosing to love people, especially when it's inconvenient, especially when it costs everything you have, especially when the world tells you it's impossible. Marcus bounced his daughter gently. This child who would grow up knowing that her family's wealth came from love transformed into action. And we learn that the love you give doesn't disappear when people grow up and move away. It grows with them, multiplies through them, becomes a foundation for everything they build in the world. Keisha, the nurse who'd learned to heal by watching Denise heal their family every day for 12 years, spoke the truth that tied all their individual stories together. The greatest gift you can give someone isn't success or security or even love itself. The greatest gift you can give someone is proof that they have enough love inside them to change the world one person at a time. Lisa, the writer who'd found her voice in this family and was now using to amplify their message, closed her notebook and spoke the final moral that would resonate long after their story ended. And sometimes, when you love completely enough for long enough, the universe conspires to show you that love doesn't just change the people you give it to, it changes everyone those people touch, creating ripples that become waves that become tsunamis of transformation that reach farther than the original giver ever dreamed possible. As evening fell over Detroit, As families gathered their children from the Foundation's playground and headed home to dinners made possible by support networks that hadn't existed a year earlier, Denise Washington sat in her office, surrounded by the 6 adults who'd once been broken children and the granddaughter who would grow up whole. Outside her window, she could see the lights of a city where they'd all learned to hope again, where love had proven stronger than every obstacle thrown in its path. The black SUV was still parked outside, but it was no longer mysterious or threatening. It was just transportation, a way for successful people to travel back to the source of their success, to collect the woman who taught them everything about love and bring her into a future where that love could reach children she'd never met, but who needed exactly what she'd given them. You know what I realized today? Denise said, looking around at faces that had grown from frightened to confident to purposeful over the span of 2 decades. What's that, Mama D? They asked almost in unison, voices blending the way they had around countless dinner tables when they were learning that family meant everyone got heard. I spent years worrying that I wasn't enough for you 6. Then I spent years worrying that you didn't need me anymore. But I never worried about the right thing. I should have been wondering how far love could travel when it was given without reservation. I should have been wondering how many lives could be changed when someone refuses to accept that change is impossible. I should have been wondering what happens when you raise children to understand that love is the most powerful force in the universe. Eleanor Carter smiled, this grandmother who'd found her way back to family through 2 decades of witnessing the results of someone else's courage. And now you know, she said simply. Baby Denise Marie looked up at her grandmother with eyes that sparkled with curiosity and confidence, with the absolute security of a child who'd never known a day when love wasn't abundant, when family wasn't permanent, when the adults in her life weren't committed to her well-being above their own comfort. And in those eyes, Denise could see the future, a future where children like Marcus and Keisha and Michael and David and Sarah and Lisa would never have to wonder if they were worth saving, because they grew up in communities that understood love as action rather than sentiment. Well then, Denise said, her voice clear and strong and full of purpose, I guess we'd better get back to work. Because the story wasn't ending. It was expanding into something bigger and more beautiful than anyone had imagined possible when one divorced woman chose to feed 4 orphans with love she couldn't afford to give. And so our story comes full circle, but not to an ending, to a beginning that's still unfolding every day. As I speak to you now, the Denise Washington Foundation for Family Preservation has helped over 400 families stay together. They prevented the separation of more than 1,000 children from their siblings. They've trained hundreds of social workers, kinship caregivers, and community members in the practical application of love that Denise perfected over 12 years in a 2-bedroom apartment. But the numbers, as impressive as they are, tell only part of the story. The real story is being written every day in the lives of children who will grow up knowing that family is sacred, that love is practical, that one person's choice to say yes, when everyone else says impossible, can change the trajectory of entire communities. Michael Carter is now the Foundation's Director of Housing Innovation, designing solutions that keep large families together in spaces that honor both their need for togetherness and their dignity as individuals. David Carter's music has raised over $2 million for family preservation programs, and his concerts now include stories about love that multiplies, hope that spreads, and the woman who taught him that broken things can be made beautiful again. Dr. Sarah Carter runs the Foundation's animal therapy programs while maintaining her veterinary practice, proving every day that healing happens best when love has 4 legs and doesn't judge. Marcus Washington, yes, he legally changed his name to honor the woman who'd given him everything that mattered, oversees the Foundation's financial programs while raising his daughter to understand that wealth means having enough to share. Keisha Washington manages the Foundation's medical partnerships while working as a pediatric nurse, carrying forward a lesson that healing requires both professional skill and unconditional love. Lisa Washington documents it all, writing stories that prove love is the most newsworthy force in the universe when someone has the courage to make it headline news. And Eleanor Carter, at 77, has become a national advocate for kinship care, sharing her story of regret transformed into action with grandparents across the country who are learning that it's never too late to choose love over fear. Together, they've proven that Denise's method, love combined with practical support, family defined by choice rather than circumstance, community created through mutual care, isn't just replicable, it's revolutionary. But this story isn't just about one woman and 6 children and the foundation they built together. This story is about what's possible when ordinary people decide that love is more important than comfort, that family is more sacred than convenience, that saying yes to someone who needs help is worth every sacrifice it requires. Right now, tonight, as you're listening to the story, there are children in your community who need what Marcus and Keisha and Michael and David and Sarah and Lisa needed 20 years ago. There are families facing crises that seem insurmountable but aren't. They just need someone willing to prove that love combined with action can overcome any obstacle. There are kinship caregivers like Eleanor once was, paralyzed by fear that they're not enough, not knowing that love doesn't require perfection. It just requires willingness. There are social workers and teachers and neighbors who see families in crisis and wonder if one person can really make a difference in problems that seem too big, too complex, too expensive to solve. The Denise Washington Foundation exists because one woman proved that one person absolutely can make that difference. But they need help scaling that love to reach every child who needs it. You can visit their website. You can volunteer your time. You can donate resources. You can advocate for policies that keep families together. You can look around your own community and ask yourself, who needs someone to say yes when everyone else is saying impossible? But most importantly, you can remember that every day presents you with choices between love and fear, between action and excuses, between believing that you're not enough and proving that love is always enough when it's given without reservation. Denise Washington was 40 years old, recently widowed, barely making ends meet when she chose to take in 6 children she couldn't afford to feed. She had no special training, no abundant resources, no guarantee that love would be sufficient to overcome the obstacles they faced. All she had was the understanding that children needed family more than family needed to be convenient. All she had was the willingness to try when trying seemed impossible. All she had was love, and the courage to prove that love really could multiply without being divided. If a recently widowed cafeteria worker with $127 in her bank account could change the lives of hundreds of families, what could you do with whatever resources you have, whatever talents you possess, whatever love you've been keeping safe instead of sharing? If 6 traumatized children could grow up to create a foundation that's changing the landscape of family preservation across the country, what could the children in your community become if someone gave them the same gift Denise gave her 6? The unshakable knowledge that they are worthy of love, worthy of sacrifice, worthy of someone fighting for their right to stay together? The black SUV that stopped at Denise Washington's door wasn't just carrying her children back to her. It was carrying proof that love is the most practical force in the universe when someone has the courage to make it practical. It was carrying evidence that the greatest investment you can make isn't in stocks or real estate or retirement accounts. It's in people who will use what you give them to give even more to others. It was carrying the answer to every person who's ever wondered if one individual can really make a difference in a world full of problems too big for any single person to solve. The answer is yes. One person can change everything. But only if that person is willing to love completely, sacrifice daily, and believe that family is worth fighting for even when, especially when, the fight seems impossible to win. So here's my challenge to you, and here's where this story becomes your story. If this story moved you, if it made you believe that love really can overcome any obstacle, if it showed you that one person's choice to say yes can create ripples that become waves that become tsunamis of transformation, then you have a choice to make. You can close this video and go back to your regular life, inspired for a moment but unchanged in your actions. Or you can ask yourself, what would I do if I had the courage of Denise Washington? What would I sacrifice if I believed as completely as she believed that love is always enough when it's given without reservation? Maybe you can't take in 6 children, but maybe you can mentor one child who needs an adult to believe in them. Maybe you can't fund a foundation, but maybe you can volunteer at organizations that keep families together. Maybe you can't change the world, but maybe you can change one family's world by showing them that their crisis is temporary, but community support can be permanent. Maybe you could be someone's Mama D. Maybe you can be the person who refuses to accept that love has limits. Maybe you can be the one who proves that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they choose love over fear, action over excuses, family over convenience. The Denise Washington Foundation for Family Preservation is still growing, still helping families, still proving that love multiplies when it's shared without reservation. But they need help. More importantly, families in your community need help. And they need people who understand that love is the most practical solution to problems that seem impossibly complex. If you believe that families belong together, share this story. If you believe that love is stronger than any obstacle, support organizations that prove it daily. If you believe that one person really can change the world, then be that person. Because somewhere tonight, there's a child who needs someone to choose love over convenience. There's a family facing a crisis that seems insurmountable but isn't. They just need someone willing to prove that love combined with action can overcome anything. There's someone who could be the next Denise Washington if they just had the courage to say yes when everyone else is saying impossible. That someone could be you. The black SUV has stopped at your door now. The question is, are you brave enough to open it? If you believe in the power of love to change the world, hit that subscribe button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Because the only people who won't share a story about love overcoming impossible odds are people who don't believe love is worth fighting for. And if you don't believe love is worth fighting for, then you haven't been paying attention to the story of Denise Washington and the 6 children who taught the world that family isn't about having enough. It's about giving everything you have. Subscribe if you believe. Share if you care. And remember, love multiplies when you're brave enough to give it away.